All right.
Rower Academy channel, baby. That's right. That's right. So, guys, thank you for taking the time today, this evening. I know you guys are busy. I know you got a lot going on, but I think, Dan and I were talking about having this conversation, the two of us, and I'm glad that Justin and Steve, you guys could join us because I think through your experiences, you guys will have a lot of insight. But where I want to jump off immediately is we're on the heels of Youth Nationals, right? We're back from Youth Nationals in Sarasota. And I was actually talking with a potential client this morning, and she was kind of relaying her experience. And I asked her, I said, well, how was nationals? And Justin, you'll probably appreciate this. She literally had the 1,000-yard stare and just goes, it was hot.
Yeah.
And she sat with that for like 30 seconds. And I was like, is there more? And then she kind of snapped back to reality. But my understanding was this year, Danny, it was hot.
Dude, they were adverse conditions if you were not heat acclimated. Like the type of heat that reminds me of straight up of training for Beijing. We're in the middle of Princeton, July, wearing long sleeve pants and shirts because it was going to be hotter than that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And if like Princeton, you remember Princeton, New Jersey, all of us know Princeton, New Jersey in July seat racing. Like there's nothing that gets worse than that in terms of intensity, in terms of adverse conditions, like that high noon seat race where your butt's on the line and you got to show up. And Steve, you're heat sensitive.
You learn what a Texas brisket feels like firsthand.
Yeah. Dude, to put it in perspective, having done acclimation training for heat, having been a wrestler and knowing what it's like to have to be in a furnace to lose weight, not intelligently. Dude, Justin, you know what it's like to sweat it out?
Yeah.
This heat was bad.
Yeah.
Bad. Like these athletes that rode at this regatta, they are tough young people.
Yeah.
Right. They're really tough young people because it was adverse conditions, right? Like the conditions could have become an advantage and there was more to overcome. It was really cool to both talk to some coaches and see the trend grow. A lot of ice baths. And I brought that to Ohio when I was coaching in high school. I will take credit for it. I was the first coach to bring an ice bath. And I have to give credit I learned that from Jimmy Tompkins and Drew in watching them in 04. Remember, they had that cool little inflatable and it was just a splash in there and deal with the heat of Beijing. And I was like, I went to the parents. The parents were great at Maritime when I coached there. And they said, hey, what do you need, coach? And I said, hey, if you can get me this inflatable hot tub that I can use as an ice bath, that'd be great. And one of the moms got it. I have to say, like, having resources matters, but they Amazon primed it to their hotel. I had this big inflatable egg and like filled it up with ice and gave those kids an advantage, right? Because it is a detriment. Ooh, ominous thunder behind me. Yeah. It is hot. Okay, to answer you, right? Is that like your athlete said, it's hot.
Florida heat's no joke.
Right. So we've arrived. So it's not only nationals where all these youth athletes are arriving and competing within their category against the best and qualified crews across the country, right? And now you've added this element of heat to the adversity of it to make a hard sport even harder. And one of the interesting things you said right now, Dan, is about parents and the parent groups. And before we started recording, we were talking about the idea of the role of coaching and the parents beyond simply the performance aspect, but the support aspect and things that they can do that either sort of help the process or hurt the process. And one of the athletes that I work with said it was very interesting. It was their first time at nationals. They're a younger athlete. They're 16 years old. And they went into that experience wide-eyed, brand new. And they're like, it was tense. Like you could feel the tension in the air. And yet my athlete and his crew were like, we didn't feel that. Like, that's not the energy we brought. That's not the energy our coach had. That's not the energy our parent group had. But we felt that from other teams we were competing against. And very interestingly, they said they felt it especially at the U19 level, like the varsity events, U19, they kind of felt that. So could you feel that sort of energy in the air? Did you in, Dan, with teams that you interacted with, were you finding that some of them had, an easier atmosphere and an atmosphere that was conducive to helping in the adverse conditions versus some other teams that were just, maybe wound a little bit too tightly, if you will, for youth sports?
Oof. Man, it was okay. It was wild. This group will understand it. Yeah, there were parents that were on overload, man. I'm not going to dance around it. It's like in that Psychology Today article you guys read that I'm in, right? Like, there are parents, and I've had these parents as cohort, both at the recruiting level when I was coaching at Northeastern, and then helping them through the recruiting process while in Fairfield County, that they want their kids to it comes from such a place of love. It really does, right? It comes from such a place of love that they want their child to have the best. And I think what happens is they're not experts in rowing, but they're experts in something else. And they think that extra gap shrinks. And they just don't respect the vocation enough. I think it's tough for them to respect the vocation of the coach or the experience, right? It's a visceral experience. Even if you were a different athlete, rowing is a visceral experience that's different. And I participated in a lot of sports. So, so you have this really conflicting place of love that we all get as parents, right? Like, it's so hard to watch your kids struggle. But when you're a high octane athlete, you know that without that struggle, there is no success. And it's got to be autonomous struggle. And they're just scared to let their kids fail. So now you have this extreme place of love and this extreme place of fear, and they meet in the middle. And yeah, it can get really tense. It can get really one-upsmanship.
And I think that speaks to a lot of things in terms of parents' roles and how they can support or how they might, as a cautionary tale of how you can kind of get in the way in a certain sense of the experience from tip to tail. And, you brought up an interesting thing that, it's nationals, right? And so certain parents are going to be tighter about the idea, like, what if my kid fails here, right? Because when I work with youth athletes, and this will be great because, I think both you, Dan, and Steve will be able to speak to this really directly. But I have parents who are worried about whether or not their kid goes to nationals and how they perform at nationals as it relates to their chances of being recruited to rowing college.
Oh man.
Before you dive into that, I'm just
sure
get on the outside.
Just swinging.
No, but I think it's an interesting thing, and I've never really thought about it from a parent perspective, but now that I'm a parent, I can think about it. Yes, I can imagine the pressure. Obviously, there's tremendous investment, right? And time, energy, cost, right? Rowing is not a buy a pair of sneakers type sport, and then you're off to the races. But how much of that anxiety is also, and this is really a question for the three of you guys, how much of that anxiety is also just built into the fact that, like, they're codependent on their teammates, right? So you could have an amazing athlete who's highly recruited, but if they have a boat surrounding them that's maybe not, top notch, but because of them, they were able to, qualify for nationals, make it to a final, whatever it may be. But, like, how much is that anxiety kind of passed on to? That would be my gut reaction, is like, it's control. They don't have control. And they're codependent on other people being other other participants in their boat, other kids, other athletes.
Yeah, and those are also other kids that they've driven to practice, so they're like,
Yeah, exactly.
they're
So yeah, I
nervous.
mean, I want you guys to answer the
Um,
question, but I mean, just that's my
you
quick
know,
take is probably like there's a lot of control issues.
yeah, I would say like, I mean, the last athlete I recruited from Lake Brantley, Justin, um,
Go Patriots.
I, I recruited her because I was like, man, like, look what she's done with not a lot around her. Imagine what she could do with a better team around her,
Just imagine what can
you know?
happen
Oh my God.
with more competition.
Um, and it could swing both ways, obviously. No, I think like I was talking about this with you know, I've been kind of refining this idea because I ran a 5K with my 9-year-old on Tuesday night,
So is it
and
really running?
I was trotting. I wouldn't call it running. She
Okay.
skipped for the first half mile and then
Did
started
you skip too?
No, I was
Wuss.
pushing.
You're a wuss.
I was pushing the twins with all the stuff underneath. Um,
I would have skipped.
but then at like right around the mile mark, she's like, "Dad, can I walk?" And I'm having these like thoughts in my head of, okay, how do I push her on without like screwing her up, right? And so I'm like having this real like internal battle of how do I say no, we're not walking while still like not like kind of screwing her up. So, we were talking, I was making deals and I'm like, all right, listen, like we're not going to walk, but we can slow down. We're never going to stop running. We can slow.
Yeah.
Or the other deal I made with her was I was like, hey, you can run ahead because you're faster than me with the boys. You can run ahead and then and you can walk until I catch you and then you can start running again. Right. And so we were making these deals. Um, but I think like as a parent, like there's that internal battle of, okay, how do I support my child without and push them without necessarily doing any ill harm or anything like that.
Well,
But ultimately, you have to remember that, like, rowing, for the purposes of your audience, Luke, rowing is like the ultimate, like, it's all of these Olympic sports. It's hold my juice box, hold my beer. Like, what, oh, you can do that. Let's see what I can do. Right. And I think that's a lot of times like lost on some of like the super parents who are like, oh, I'm going to go out and buy this. I'm going to go out and buy this. I'm going to send them out to here. Right. Whereas like at its heart, it's, you're looking at your peers and you're like, whoa, that was really awesome. Like, I'm going to try it. It's like being at like a skate park and seeing your buddy doing a trick for the first time. You're like, oh, man, I want to try that.
yeah.
Um, and we
Oof.
and we lose that. So sometimes like there's like that loss there.
Yeah. Well,
And
it's
do
look,
you, and
it's
Dan,
but it's all tied, but it's that all of this angst. Sorry to cut you off, Luke.
no, it's fine.
No, no,
You're
you're
probably
not.
going to
No.
answer the question I was going to give you.
You're right. I think to level set, because going back to the question, which is, look, it's a place of love and fear. Okay, those two things. The biggest fear is the fear that the investment in the child and the sport won't yield to college access.
Mhm.
Right? Like we got to call it what it is. It's about getting a coveted spot in college. And whether that is a likely letter at an Ivy, whether that is a scholarship from schools that have them, whether it's just admissions, whether it's just a look. And so I think it's important. It's really important to like level set and talk about that's what it is. And as that has become a social status thing more than ever, that is where the pressure is. Because it's less about the advancement of the athletes rowing and more about the advancement of their social status. And that's where we have a huge disconnect. That's where we have a huge disconnect because I think in this cohort, at least this group, college was just the modality that ultra competitiveness came in. Right? Like The only reason to go to college was to row at a higher level. Stop. Like that, like as much as a good college mattered to something, it was like, where am I going to go? Like when I looked at colleges, it was like, where does my assets, right? My ERG score, my grades, my board scores, what seat at which table to possibly win will this get me at? Like that. And that was my only focus looking at colleges. So it was not like, to me, I think that's where the parents get a disconnect is like, that's a really unique mindset of a high schooler. Like if your kid's normal, like has normal friends and normal behaviors and normal, like they're probably not a Division I athlete. Like athlete that wants to be Division I in high school is the weirdo.
Yeah. Can I ask you guys this, like to kind of steer it? How many times did you race at youth nationals when you were in high school?
0.
0.
First crew ever from Fairfield County, believe it or not.
Yeah.
Pretty sure.
I went once
Yeah,
my
I mean,
junior year, once my junior year, and we had to petition in. So
Same.
I would almost,
Same.
I would almost ask, I would say like, I would turn it around and Luke, I'm kind of taking charge, but I would say, do you think
please.
youth nationals has gotten too big? Right? So has it gotten so big that there's like on the parent side, there's this fear that, oh, if my kid doesn't go, it's going to be a negative?
Yeah, but no, it's not.
Like,
If the ERG
has
score's
it?
there, if the ERG score's there,
Well, I'm just saying as a regatta, not from the recruiting side, but as a
okay.
regatta, has it gotten so big? And also, I was thinking about your response to like how hot it was. Has youth nationals gotten so big? They've added so many events and so many crews. Has it gotten so big that they logistically couldn't change the schedule to minimize the heat?
Yeah, I
Right?
mean, they're
Like,
what, 428 entries, right? Total at nationals,
yeah.
like 70 something or 80 something different teams. So, I mean, that's a healthy size regatta. It's going to require a lot of racing. If even if you're doing time trial, semifinals for ABs, and final, and then you run the CD finals, that's still going to be a very healthy,
What
bigger schedule.
Crew Classic's a similar regatta, right?
Yeah, the Crew Classic runs all day,
Yeah.
now 2.5 days. In my time, it was 2 days straight. And, racing would start at 7:10 in the morning and it would end around 4 in the afternoon. And that was on 8-minute centers. I mean, there was literally a race going down every 8 minutes with 2 20-minute breaks in the day and one 1-hour lunch break. The rest of the time it was just racing. I mean, it's a bear. And so there's a lot going on. And Steve, to that point, it's actually something I did want to talk about because I know people have mixed responses, even now, because this is not a new change. But when we change to age groups, and now there's a youth, U19 national champion, there's a U17 national champion, and a 16, and you have all these different age groups. Is that I don't want to use, I'm trying to think of the right word. Does that strengthen the youth national championship? Does it change it in terms of, crews that are there? There are youth athletes who could be better skilled, but are not going because they didn't qualify in the U19s. And instead, someone else who's U16, for example, or 17 is showing up and competing for a national title and is celebrated as a national champion, right? I mean, is it still the equivalent of varsity, JV, 3V, 4V, or is it more nuanced because it really positions people into age categories? And am I driving at it the right way in terms of asking the question?
Yeah. I mean, but Steve, Justin, before I go on a yarn, as usual.
I can't speak to it. I maybe I'm just aging myself. Like, yeah,
don't be ageist to yourself. You have plenty to contribute,
national, man. Again, like I didn't. First of all, I rode on a high school team, not on a club. Okay, so that was a big differentiator. I remember vaguely.
Yes, that was a huge
For me, it
differentiator back then.
was Scholastic Nationals was the pinnacle, and it was JV varsity, whatever, and that was the national champion. Period.
Was it
Then there was
1500
this
or
other
2K?
thing, 1500 meters. Then there was this other thing, and so it was like there was Stotesbury, but then there was Scholastic Nationals, which was like bigger than just Stotesbury. And then it was just basically like if you won the Scholastic Nationals, you were the national champion in whatever category. But then there was also the other club nationals, which I think is now youth nationals, that it was like we weren't even qualified for because we were a high school team, we weren't a club team. And so it was like we're out. So it didn't matter. But again, that's just me. So I'm interested more to hear what you guys say because like
Yeah.
it wasn't really on my radar.
Yeah, like when I was in high school, we did SRAs or SRAAs, right? Like I'm shortening it. So that was 1500. And then we would race because I went to high school in Buffalo. We would race the CSSRA, the Canadian Secondary Schools National Championship. We just always shortened it to schoolboys. And that was like our 2K, right? SRAs was 1500, schoolboys was 2K. And then, my junior year of high school, we were quick enough. We finished second at SRAs. So our coach was like, okay, I'm going to petition to see if we can get our Cox 4 into youths. And we went to, Bethel, Ohio,
Yep.
and we raced there. And I have this memory of it just being like a small regatta because it was a very like kind of like small invite list almost. And
I think it only went to B finals.
I only think, yeah, I think it was only like, I only remember racing like two, maybe three times.
It
And
might have been similar. It might have been similar to sprints, I think.
yeah, maybe.
Right? Because or the IRA, because there were trucks. I don't, well, that I can't remember now. It's also blurry, truthfully.
Yeah. I mean,
But
and
my experiments was similar to yours, junior year, but we were a club team.
yeah,
Right. I just think the similarities, but there's what, 6 year, you graduated high school in 02?
yep.
Yeah. So like we're almost exactly 5 years academic. So even 5 years later, youth nationals was basically the same. If you were not, so I'm trying to think of what I'm trying to get to is I forget what the direct qualifiers of that were then. I think it was like the winner of Stotesbury and because that was the beginning of what youth nationals is now. And I think that's why it's important. Is what
Yeah.
youth nationals is now evolved from that regatta that you and I attended in Bethel.
Yeah. So like I think you had to win one of the majors, right? And then if you were like a medalist, you could petition as like an outsider. But then, none of the New England schools would go because they couldn't get permission to go longer. Um, and I don't think there was very much West Coast participation. Um, we wound up getting third at youths the year we went, so we justified the petition. And I think a guy I rode with, I didn't know at the time, a guy I rode with in college wound up, was in the same event and was like second. And, we get to school and we're like, oh yeah, we were actually in the same race. I didn't know that. But now it seems like, US Rowing tried to go to this like regional qualification. But then they've kind of seems like that qualification has almost expanded and now there's like state ways to qualify through state championships.
Wait, yeah. I was on the Northeast Youth Committee when I was coaching there. So so at least in the Northeast, and a lot of it I think has to do with the fact that any IRA is in New England. So you're talking about all the prep schools that came in, they're as old as the Ivies. So and like to give rowing its respect of like being the oldest, rowing was the first intercollegiate sport. Right. So all of college athletics is based upon rowing, right? That it was because of that race between Yale and Harvard. So it's cool to be part of that history. But then with history comes a lot of tradition, and with tradition comes difficulty in moving forward sometimes. So in the Northeast region, you can get to youth nationals now through any IRAs or Northeast regionals. And it used to be, if you were, I forget, some of the schools from New York can compete in Northeast regionals because it's a regional regatta. So it used to be
But you
somebody
can
gets
also
it.
do New York State championships.
Correct. It's actually a competitive advantage for those teams that had the choice. If you were a club, your only choice was Northeast regionals to move forward. So we actually, Sharon, Chris, and I actually worked together to be like, no, you have to declare which regatta you're qualifying in before the season, because you could kind of play the field that way. And Northeast regionals was usually the first one of those 3 regattas. So you could declare after Northeast region, like if you got doored at Northeast regionals, you could still make it into youth nationals through one of these other regattas. So it was really cool to be part of that and just kind of bring in like, no, you're giving somebody a competitive advantage by giving them a choice. And that, I think that shows how difficult it is to grow these regional championships, because there's these pockets of tradition, which are really important, like Stotesbury and the Maniflicks in the Philly area. Then you have the Mid-Atlantic region, and Luke, you could speak more to but like US rowing does have a crazy job of trying to take this tradition and make it a fair and equitable path. It is a very big challenge to do. Which leads to like, yeah, I think the regatta is too big.
Okay.
And there's two reasons, both from the competitive side and the vocational side.
Okay. And I get that. And then the follow-up question is it still too big in light of 2 really big topics that I work on personally in my coaching every day, which is development and longevity? Does the regatta serve for the development of youth athletes at each stage, because now it's broken down into age categories? And does it help or hurt the potential longevity of these athletes because they're gearing up for nationals every year and getting into that environment? Right? Because just to kind of abstractly put it out there, but it's not like some situation I'm just making up. It's very common that I will start working with athletes specifically that are freshmen and sophomore, and I have to be very careful about how I train them in terms of how I introduce them to the sport, what the pressure points are, when we start really focusing on performance and those sorts of things. Because there's many things you can do with younger athletes on a technical side, on a fun side, on a challenging side that aren't necessarily traditional training and physiology, but they are ways to move youth athletes forward in fitness, in mentality, and in their development, to then meet them a lot of times for young men junior year, and for young women it can be during sophomore year, where they're ready to take on more training and they're ready to embrace and engage the sort of physiological side of things. Because this, again, Dan and Steve, you guys have front row seats for this, is that there is this pressure cooker that is recruiting for athletes and that want to row in school, right? That they want to go to university and want to row, and they want to be recruited. And that timeline, really, let's call it like all the actions really happening junior year, by junior year, right? And then you have athletes that aren't even really ready to prepare themselves for the recruiting process until junior year. And so I'm always up against this kind of, hey, early on, freshman and sophomore year, let's bring you along, but let's bring you on in a place that allows you to jump off at the right time to go. Because I've seen, not in my own coaching, but I've seen a lot of different situations in which athletes are pushed too hard too early. And yeah, they get there in high school, and then they go into college, and year 1, they're done, or maybe 2 years, or they just don't have they don't have the burn on and the interest. And on the other hand, I've seen athletes that are getting to that right spot. And then it's really in college where they kind of become themselves. And so I'm curious what your guys' take is in terms of how you work to identify things like that, to in a recruiting process. How can you, do you take that into consideration? Is it just the performance, or is it the future potential, and understanding where an athlete is, mentally and emotionally in the process?
I mean, man, so many, dude, that is such a great essay to answer. And I say essay not and to insult you at the length, but in terms of like, yeah, it is a long form question. I kind of want Justin as the inside or outside observer on this. So Steve coaches Division I women. I coach Division I men and coached high school boys directly, but also assisted with the girls team and all things college recruiting. When I helped those high school girls, young women, through that process. So I kind of like, what's more interesting to you? Because truthfully, the women's NCAA is where there's a lot of collegiate growth. Like the men's side has stayed relatively stale since you were there. Like if you went back to collegiate rowing now, Justin, it wouldn't look that much different to you than it was for us in 2001. It's not, it really isn't. But if you look at the women's side, it's like, yeah, you go. Thank you, women, for what you did for rowing. Right. Thank you. And so I'm just kind of interested as a sports marketing guy, which one has more interest to you, the tradition or the future?
Well, I can't ignore the growth of women's sport, period, right now. I think that you have to look at the future of where it's going. I think obviously I think that we were all kind of in that large swing of kind of just the explosion of women's rowing in the early 2000s at the collegiate level. I mean, I know there were a lot of women that I rowed with in high school that probably wouldn't get recruited today, but at the time there was a really big groundswell of women's programs that were getting stood up. Things like, Texas, Tennessee, Kansas, think colleges like that were starting to build really big programs. But that said, I think to your point, Dan, I'm on the fence. I think that there's a need for both sides. I think that women's rowing and the explosion that it had and it continues to have is really great for just the health of the sport as a whole. The more participation there is universally, the better I think things become. But then, look, we all rode in a very traditional system, which I wouldn't exchange, right? I think that there's an amazing life lesson, especially in the Eastern Sprints League, of treating the shirt off your back after you cross the finish line to appreciate a win and a loss. And so I also love the tradition. I actually am more curious as to what it's like now more on the collegiate level than the high school level. Just about the freshman versus non-freshman rules that are happening now, because we were in that system tradition, right, of you're a freshman, you got a freshman. But no, I think this is a really good question for Steve and for you, Dan. For me, I love both sides. I love a bigger, healthier sport, because I think the more participation the sport can have universally is just good for exposure and for the sport to grow and for teams to be look, I think that it's good in that, like, I'll be honest, like the high school I went to, which Steve, you said you recruited from, like we were treated like second class citizens. Like we were a club that was in a high school that like got no funding. Like we couldn't use the locker room. It was like our boathouse was like 20-minute drive away. It was like a whole thing. Whereas I think it's probably a little bit more accepted now, just given the scale and size of the sport and the teams. But again, participation is great. But then again, like the tradition side of things with you know, especially at the collegiate level that we all raced in with, you know, trading shirts. And, you know, that's a really good life lesson as to like the value of a win and a loss that I would never exchange.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I guess one of the things we could do, Steve, is work. I mean, to me, the number one thing I look for in the recruiting process, period, is if the athlete is driving that process. Like straight up, right? As soon as it feels like the athlete is being handheld or taught to speak a certain way or have certain questions, or there's no depth to it, then it's almost a telltale sign of like they have gotten help, but the wrong type of help. Because if an athlete that I would always look for has to be similar to what I remember myself being like, and Luke, you being like in that junior team in '97, where we were all so pumped to get to college. And we're just like, thank God I'm at this camp because it's going to give me a little bit of an edge because it's going to be so hard. So hard. So to me, I'm always interesting into if that athlete wants to be here, they're going to let me know. And if somebody else is advocating for them to be here, I'm not quite sure they have the stuff. Doesn't mean they don't. So I think the athlete driving the process, like, are they making the calls? Are they initiating the emails? Are they stimulating the conversation? Are they actually interested in what we're doing for training? And like big questions about it, and then putting themselves in that situation. Could I handle that training load? Are they showing the proper amount of respect to the process? Like, yeah, I'm not quite sure what to expect, coach. Like I loved this one recruit who just looked me straight in the eyes. Like, I don't know what to expect. I'm just excited to see it all.
Yeah.
that
I like that. I
yeah,
like that a lot.
like I was like,
that gets me fired up.
I need to get this kid. I need to get this kid. They're
Yeah.
excited, like, and so much of what we've talked about this youth nationals pressure is kids coming to the recruiting process just sapped.
Mm-hmm.
They're sapped. They're like, I don't know. It's harder. It's going to be harder than high school. God, okay, great. You could just see the life has been drained from them. They're just so autonomous, right? They're automatically just like
Automatons.
automated.
automatons. Here's my ERG score. Here's my SAT. Here's my PSAT. Here's my like, okay, I get you're checking those boxes, man. But who are you?
Yeah.
Because that's everybody. In reality, is like if they're getting recruited Division I, that's everybody. You're not special.
I think, Dan, like the conversation evolves, and so first it comes down to, from like the coach's side, like really identifying what it is that you're looking for. And I would say if it goes beyond just, yeah, like the height, weight, 2K, that, right? Like, and goes to, are you a developmental coach? Like, are you someone, like, for me, I'm really concerned trying to figure out and extrapolate on, where is someone going to be basically 5 years from when I first start talking to them. I don't care where they are right now. I'm trying to, look at like the tea leaves and what they're telling me to figure out where they're going to be 5 years from now. Some other programs that are a little bit more established have the luxury of kind of demanding a more finished product when they show up, and don't always aren't necessarily always interested in development, and more like, hey, where are you now? Because that's what I want when you show up here. And it'd be great if you improved, but where are you now? So it's kind
do you
of,
think there's a delta of about, and this again, because it's a great point, but I think metrics matter, right? Metrics do matter. So the ERG score does matter. Like all this is what we're talking about is nice, but the ERG score matters. And so the way I looked at the metric was over 5 years, because I'm with you, is that you're looking at the potential of having this athlete for 5 years, and you want them there for 5 years because you have hope. I constantly recruiting have hope that someone's going to have this amazing breakthrough. Like, half our teammates did. Like half the Olympians are walk-ons in college. So it's a late bloomer sport. So they're part of the optimism of the recruiting is like, I don't want you a finished product now. Because if you're finished now, then where are we going from here? Because this high school is not enough. And so the delta is like, I felt like over the course of those years, if they got good training, they could be 20 seconds faster.
Yeah, I would say 20 to 25.
And that's why it's
is
like
the base assumption.
Obviously having a kid close to 6 or below 6 is amazing. And if you get the phenom that's sub 550 or something, great, right? Of course, everybody wants that. But to you, the development track, because you need that person to be in it for those 5 years to get that 20 seconds faster. Because then all of a sudden, for at least for men, that 6:15, right, is a 5:55, and that's a contributor. Yeah. That's a contributor, and they have 5 years to become to form into that contributor.
So you're trying to say, okay, why are they 6:15 right now on the men's side, or on the women's side, right? Like, why are they 7:25 or 7:30 right now? What is their outlier? What are they missing? Are they not doing the same volume that others have? Are they just not as mature? Have they not had time in the weight room? Like, what are the kind of like the missing pieces to that profile that can kind of step up? And I think that I would say like the base assumption is 20 to 25 seconds, right? And then over 4 years of college training, just baked in from volume, maturity, and just kind of any run-of-the-mill training program. But then you also say, okay, well, what's holding them back, right? Like, and so you're trying to figure out, okay, are there someone who's not necessarily gonna, prioritize their nutrition? Are they being handheld by parents? And so if you take them 1,000 miles away from their family, how are they going to do on their own? Like, what's going to happen when the rigors and pressures of academics come into play, when they've been challenged in a way that they've honestly never been challenged before, because rowers are screwy in the head, and a lot of times high school has been easy. So it's, you're asking all those questions, and, not necessarily directly, but you're trying to figure all that out, and extrapolate out. And that's where it's like it's the old cliche, right? Like, I don't know art, but I know what I like. Like, you're trying to establish that. And that takes time, and the answer is different for each university. Like, what worked at Cal for Luke is different than what worked at Northeastern for Dan and Justin, and what's different that worked at Princeton for me. So it's, and you couldn't necessarily take that, like, you couldn't necessarily duplicate it. Like, we couldn't do what Cal did, like what Steve did with you guys at Cal, Luke. We couldn't take that and bring it to Northeastern, because it's a different university and it doesn't always fit.
Yeah, that's the question I was going to ask you, Steve, is what's your balance of recruiting for culture fit versus recruiting for numbers and metrics?
Yeah. I mean, it evolves, right? Because I think one of the things I try to do is, in the conversations that I have, is I'm talking to athletes, because Father Zanoni, who taught me 10th grade geometry in high school, had this saying where he said, he used to say his catchphrase, and it was plastered all over the school because everyone loved it. He'd say, "Pursue excellence, not perfection, because only God is perfect." Right? And I would say the same is true for culture, right? Or for speed, or what you currently have on your team. You're never going to say we've arrived. Right? You're never going to say, "Oh, this is it. We've got it." Right? You're always going to be like, "All right, like, if I feel like we have it, but if you're feeling like it's good, you're like, okay, it's good, but let's see if we can get it better without like screwing it up." Right? And if it's not good, then you're saying just straight up, let's make it better. But I always try to make sure that I'm talking to the women I'm recruiting, I'm talking to them about the things, kind of at a high level, not in like the nitty gritty, but I'm talking to them about the things that we're trying to do to make our team faster. So then, as far as like a cultural fit, if they're excited about the things that we're trying to do currently, and they're thinking, okay, well, like, what's it going to be like next year? Like, we're still going to be doing that. Let's carry it on. And we want them kind of excited about, and kind of coming in eyes wide open of saying, okay, this is the direction I'm expecting of the team. This is the direction I'm expecting it's going. So, you never want someone to show up and, feel like they've been sold a bill of goods, right? Like when I first showed up, where I am now, I had a woman come in the office and she said, hey, like I came here, and she was in like the School of Hotel Management, which is really like a business program. And she was like, I came here because like I wanted to learn how to run a hotel, but I'm sitting here and all my classes are about like how to take people's money and turn it into like more money. And I was like, what's wrong with that? But she was like, this is not what I thought it was going to be. I thought I was going to be learning how to like stand behind a hotel and like run it and manage employees and things, right? And I was like, it's a business program, right? Like you got to learn how to like take the guests, room money and like do something with it.
Yeah.
But she really felt like she wasn't getting out of it what she came for. And so I mean there was nothing I could do there, like, and I think she was also homesick. She was a San Diego woman, so she was like missing, and it wasn't even cold yet, but she was missing the Southwest there. So I think you want to make sure that like you're just open and honest and saying, hey, this is what we're doing, right? So they're all on board with it.
Yeah. That's, dude. And I think just flipping it to the other side of that coin, right? Which is like where the athlete's at is I don't know if college wasn't in my cards until rowing happened, probably. Like there my sisters had gone to college, but no male had ever gone to college in my life. And so like just the statistics that I had to overcome just to have college be a real thing, let alone be a collegiate recruit. So for my interesting experience of this is I had to drive that whole process myself. Like my parents didn't graduate high school, so there was no real resource. And because rowing was so new in Norwalk, Connecticut, like the guidance counselors and other coaches, like some kids had gotten recruited for football and wrestling and like their typical field sports, but nobody knew what to do with rowing. And the assumption was like there was only the Ivy Leagues that had rowing. The irony is is Luke, I've told you this, and I told Gladstone this too, is like I remember getting a pamphlet from Cal around my sophomore year that had like information. Do you want to go to Cal? And it must have been from some junior team score I submitted. I missed some, like I made the top half of the page. And I just tell this for perspective of how far it's gotten in 20 plus years. Is it said ACT, SAT score, and I had no ideas what those were yet. Just I knew they were tests, but there was no prep or anything for it I didn't know. So I thought, oh, I don't have those, so I must not qualify. Right. So I think
I got it. Just side note, I got a application from Syracuse that had how far it's come, that had in Sharpie men's rowing written on the top of it. Like, yeah, I don't think that happens these days.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's evolved so much, but the basics are the same. Is in that recruiting bandwidth, and there are several bandwidths, and that's what I talk about. It's like, so in the top bandwidth, there's athletes that everybody wants. And some of them have not like I called my recruiting, like the way I described it, it's a three-legged stool. So if you have a faster, you have good grades, and you have good board scores, you're going to sit wherever you want. And as soon as one of those legs starts to get short, the stool gets way more wobbly. And if you only have one, now you're trying to balance it. So if you have none, like, yeah, it'd be great if you apply, come try out when you get here type of thing, right? So I think it's really important to remember that the metrics do matter. But there's been time, I remember very distinctly having a recruit come to campus, and both myself and the team did not get a good feeling about it. And they wanted to come, and it was like, we kind of just like moved on, and that athlete became a problem. Right. So the other thing is, like, once the team starts to, I think, value itself, and Justin, this is important. Your experience is really important to this, is that for the young people out here that may be listening to this too, is you do have to figure out where you're exceptional. Right. And if you're not exceptional, it's going to be more difficult for you to go through this recruiting process and go where you want to go. Like, if you want to row in college, you can row in college. But it's really important to, like, level set. And this is where I think the parents and sometimes the clubs can get in the way, is when the level setting of where actually do you stand with the expectation. Because that, in the recovery world, I always hear the saying, like, resentment is just an expectation that wasn't met. And that's what I think when we talk about that feeling of youth nationals full circle, there's a lot of resentment from tent to tent sometimes, because there is certain things that are stacked in the favors of affluence and rowing still. Really stacked. And I don't think that's any sport or anything that has more capital can usually have better results. I think we had the juxtaposition of that on the national team. Like, we're one of the most least funded teams in the Olympic movement, right? Like, we have the lowest funding as rowers compared to our contemporaries. So it's just this weird juxtaposition too, of some of these high schools are better funded than the national team. If you look at the price of, like, if you look at the per capita per athlete that's spent, because when you're a parent of means, there is no expense for your kids. I mean, if you're a parent without means, there's, like, you do with it, kind of give your kid everything to give them an advantage. But it's gotten so far that we've taken away the best advantage, which is building grit. That's the best advantage, is grit.
My father-in-law, when I was first marrying my wife, he asked about kids, and I, kind of demurred, and my first answer was, well, like, I feel like we need to get a little more established first. And he stopped me and he said, listen, in my experience, no matter how much money you make, you are never going to be able to afford your kids. So you may as well just have them when you don't have money, right? And so, to your point, Dan, right? It's like when it's your kid, like, there's nothing you wouldn't spend for them, like whatever you have, right? And I think that is the point, right? Where it's like, are we almost shortchanging people? And this is like a question that I have for you guys, and not necessarily, for Instagram, but it's almost like, or for a reel, but it's almost like, has youths become so big that there is an assumption that, hey, I went to youths, now I'm going to get recruited, right?
Absolutely.
Like,
they pitch it that way.
Yeah.
It is pitched that way.
Well, it's positioned that
So
way,
then
right?
that's your
Because I
parental
had
pressure right there.
I was not there this year, Dan, but my understanding was there was a lot of college coaches that were on the grounds and at meet and greets and
Yeah,
things along those lines, where it's sort of
there always kind of has been. Were a lot of head coaches there?
that I don't know.
No. Right. And I think, again, the distinction has to be, if the head coach is taking the lead, again, it's all about driving the process. Right. If the decision maker, so the athlete, and again, let's say the erg score and the coach are both like, yeah, we want to make this happen. Like that's when it gets really good, right? Like I used to love recruiting when I would say, yeah, go on as many official visits as you can. Because I believe if you really want to go here, no matter what else you see, you're coming to Northeastern. And if you don't, good.
Here's the issue though now. Now that's unlimited. Now there are unlimited official visits.
Right, which is it better. It's better. Because then it's if the kids like
in my experience, there were women this fall who got to they had done like 6 official visits or 7 official visits, and they were like, my teachers say if I miss any more school, like they were like, I can't come. I'm interested, but I can't. If I miss school, they're gonna fail me.
Right.
Right.
But that's that they're also not training.
Yeah. I mean,
also
some
not
of them
tra-
were
they're
still
also not
good.
training.
Some of them still won.
They're obviously
Still-
not sure, but they're obviously not that serious about college rowing. Because if you're thinking that you're good enough in high school to row in college, you're already a step behind.
Well, I would push back and just say like it's become like so much of a rat race that people are doing it without necessarily knowing what they
Yes,
want, and that's
my question is that smart? Is that smart, right? Like my
no, but there's
question to you-
FOMO. But there's FOMO. And everyone's fault, even the
There's
best.
also steroids. Is everyone doing those? Like just because it's a thing doesn't mean it's the right thing.
Yeah.
Just
I'm
because
just
it just
I'm not arguing. I agree.
right.
I agree. I'm just telling you what I saw, right? And it was like,
yeah.
and people didn't know. Like you said, you didn't even know what SATs were. This was a Wild West. I think it's gonna be different next year. I think it's going to be different next year because, so many schools are bringing back SATs. It's going to slow the process down incredibly. This year I doubt many head coaches were at youth nationals this year because, I wasn't there, but I doubt many were there because there's a lot of people that are already done, right? That already have their classes. And it's on the women's side, which is much more accelerated than the guys' side.
And there were head coaches there. It's just what I would like to achieve is that just let's level set the expectations so the deficit of not taking the step forward or feeling like this decision is the decision for the rest of your life. When again, college has changed. There's no longer a penalty for transfer.
Right.
Like to me, it's about the mental health of the young people, man. Like I'm trying to set the stage less for like what is best for the adolescent mind, heart, and soul. Like the tension. If the regatta has this issue where people feel like it's tense and not fun, that matriculates to the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm seeing as the issue, as the endemic, is that we have a generation of these really competitive high school oarsmen and women, and we have more junior rowing than there ever has. And we have less of them doing it in college.
Yeah.
And it's like, what's the point of all that commitment? Rowing is such a grueling sport to just have the lights taken out of a child before they even get to experience collegiate rowing all the way through. It's a travesty, dude. It's a travesty we're up against because of this recruiting thing.
Yeah.
It's a travesty. We are breaking children's hearts. That's it. So to me, it's like the rules and like the FOMO is like, don't stress your kid out about it so much that it's no longer fun because you just took away their best recruiting tool. Is going fast, working hard, and winning with your best friends and then losing with your best friends, either or, the best thing you've ever went through in your life. Yeah, you might make it here in college because it's that times a million. And if you really want to make it to the Olympic, it's that times a billion. You gotta want it more than anyone else, but for other people, not yourself. It's the only way. The boat chooses you, man, not the people in the boat choose you, not the coach. And if you want to make it in college and you want to make it at a team that punches onto the podium, that has a chance to punch into the podium, that's got to be the number one thing you convey, is that you love this sport and you're not burnt out and your appetite is just started.
Yeah. So one of the things we talk about that our director of leadership and sport performance has talked about is, he talks about creating an inside out culture versus an outside in culture. And an inside out culture is one where you are convinced, like you're saying, this is what I'm doing. It's the right thing, and I'm doing it, and I'm having fun, and this is how we're going forward, and you're completely bought in, right? And an outside in culture is one where you are you're looking at other things. You're like, what are these people doing? What's going on over here? What's the shiny object outside of our team, right? And I think what you're talking about, Dan, to like just think about like the lens of what we're working on is really trying to develop that inside out culture, right? And that's how you achieve at the highest level, is if that's kind of baked into the athlete already. It's shoot, Dan, like I remember, we used to talk about the Dan Erg rodeo, right? We'd roll up to the Hansa Cup and we'd be ripping those 500s before the Hansa Cup, and we'd be like, all right, Dan's like, steps on the stage and he's like, hey guys, watch this. Watch the Erg rodeo. Get ready. And watching the front of that fan kind of dancing up and down. And like I do think that's that's like kind of missing, right? Where it's like, you look across in the boat next to you. And like, I remember when I was in college, like that pre-race talk, I think my freshman year, we're having the pre-race talk and our coach is like, it's Eastern Sprints finals. And the only crew that we really didn't know what they were going to do was the Brown crew. And our coach looks at us and he goes, guys, I'm friends with the Brown freshman coach. I could walk over there and tell him exactly what the race plan is, and it's not going to matter, right? Because you guys are just going to execute and you're going to make it not matter, right? And there were far more expletives like laced into that. But that's like,
Who was your freshman coach?
Greg Hughes, right? Yep. And back when, he was a little more fiery. I don't know. It's been a while, but he used to say having daughters, like kind of, took the fire out of him a little bit. I think, we would, I think that to me is that inside out culture where you're like, okay, we're going to do what we're going to do regardless of what anyone's doing, and like, the first time you guys did ice bath, right? Or, I look around college rowing and, you look at like the evolution of, men banging on boats as they're launching, right? How much did you see that? How much has it filtered down to like getting on the dock at youths, right? And it started out, I look at just in my own world, I'm like, yeah, people were looking at like the Yale men, starting to win everything the last couple of years, and now every college boathouse, like guys when they're launching out of I think it probably came from Oxford and Cambridge, is people banging on the boats as they're leaving from the boat race, and then people watching the YouTube videos and like, whoa, that's cool, like let's do that. And now like, half the boathouses I'm in, like the guys' crews are like banging on the boats going, yeah, and we're like going out to do 10K of steady state, and they're like going out like they're going out for the boat race. And that to me is like a very outside in culture. But if it works, great, then you can take it and turn it into your inside out culture. But I think that to me is the big issue, is that in rowing, and I would imagine it's true in other sports. In rowing, there's a lot of people who are like, watching, Instagram, TikTok, talking to friends, and they're like kind of obsessed about, what's going on at these other places. And you're like, yeah, but what are we doing? Like, let's have fun. Like let's stop worrying about what other people are doing.
I mean, yeah, I think that's spot on, man. That's spot on, Steve. But it just goes, I think to me, it's just, you just reinforced driving the process. Because if you're doing outside in, you're being a passenger. You're emulating, and when you emulate, I think generally the best you can hope is to get second.
What was the Mike Tatyism, right? What was the
Which one?
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, I can still remember quite a few of them. That was 20 years ago.
Yeah, but the outside in culture, right? I used to look over at the crew next to me, and I'd see those guys like pouring out their water bottle at the start line, and I'd say, that's when I knew I was gonna beat them. If they had to dump out their water to get that extra little juice that lightened the boat just a little bit to beat me, I'd already beaten them, right?
That's
and you
great.
Remember,
yeah,
you remember that? And then we'd get to the start line, and Josh would be sitting there, and he'd go, the Germans would be going, ah, right at the start line, and Josh would just go, that's when I knew, and so like, we took that, and we're like, yeah, like, okay, that's what they got to do, fine, whatever.
Yeah, it just, to me, that's funny because it's like, yeah, you just gotta, in some ways, you just gotta know, yeah, we're gonna beat them, and whatever that talisman or sign is. Like for Mike, it was the pouring out of the water bottles. I just remember the reason why we did it is because he didn't want him banging around. Like, I didn't care about the weight. It was like, let's pour this out and throw it. Like, I remember just throwing the full water bottle to the, like, I just don't want this thing banging around or popping loose and getting caught under my foot, Like, it was just a variable that wasn't needed for the race. And it's funny. It's like Mike had the same perspective, which is like, he saw it as like, oh, they're trying to get less weight in the boat. Or it just shows you that high performance mindset where the same stimulus can mean so many things, but as long as it means like, this is an advantage. That's what's great about it, right? And I think that's what I do see at youth nationals, is you do see there is a beautiful space, and it's mostly at the U19. Because to your earlier point, Luke, I think I would love to discuss maturity, right? I think maturity is a missing thing in this, and there's different levels of maturity. But there were some real professionals, future professionals at that U19 level. And there's a really good, what I hope is like, I hope those athletes, they seem to really thrive on the competition. I know there's some really good coaches out there where, there were some photo finishes, and it didn't quite go the way they wanted it to, and coaches wanted to lobby to make sure the photo finish list was accurate. So that's a little, like, I just love there was that avocation of like, man, no, it can't be, it couldn't come down to that, right? Knowing, like, that's the thing, some of these high school kids, it could be their pinnacle too. It could, because not every college experience is great. And so I think that's the other thing that we have to recognize, is that for a lot of these young people, they have that graduation there because they're choosing to be there versus their high school graduation. There's so much choice in these young people to be there, the ones that want to be. So there's a lot of good that's coming out of this too, this opportunity at the collegiate level. There's a lot. And what I would hope for them is just to broaden your horizons of like what it means to be like, maybe you won't fit in at that one school that everyone's telling you to go to, but maybe this other school where you could make the difference, right? Like, that's the other thing is, when you're being recruited, a coach wants to see if you think you can make a difference. Are you coming to join a legacy or start a legacy? You know, that, and that whether you have the ability to do that or not. I mean, shit, Luke, we talked about this. You didn't go into Cal thinking you were going to be the legacy. You were just hoping to
No,
hang on.
no, I was like, I got
You
there
were
and
just
I
hoping
was
to
just,
hang on.
it was literally like, I'm just happy to be here. How are you guys
Yeah.
doing? You know, like,
Yeah.
and that's kind of how that started. You know, it's yeah, that was a wild experience in and of itself. But, you know, sitting here and listening to the responses and where you guys have taken the conversation, you know, there's some themes that I really feel are emerging. And like, first and foremost, which I think is probably the most important one, is listening to you guys relive some of the hardest days of your life and laughing about it and the joy that you take from it. Like being on the national team, training for the Olympics, going to the Olympics, and being able to like laugh about the water bottles and the Germans on the line, and you know, to be on the start line and to just like get your team laughing because you're like, that's when I knew. Like to be able to do those things in such a hard situation, I think is really important. And that's how I remember my rowing experience and our rowing experiences, you know, Dan, and the crossover that we had, which was like, yeah, it was hard. And we could have been drawn down in that, but we just decided to always remember. And it was, I'm pretty sure it was Volp that started saying it, where he would just like stop and be like, guys, it's only rowing. Like it's only rowing, you know, our whole lives were dedicated to nothing other than rowing.
Yeah.
And we would have to create this levity at that level and say, it's only rowing. And then we were like, it was serious business, but we realized like not to take ourselves seriously. And so what it comes back to is, you know, there's so much joy that was taken out of all of those really hard experiences in high school, in college, on the national team. You know, those were some of the hardest days. Those were some of the toughest conditions. And yet, you know, as we look back on it, and maybe it's just the distance from it, but I still remember in that time we were having a ton of fun in these really chaotic, you know, situations where nothing was certain, and we were trying to get through there. So let me just complete this thought. So we have like joy, right? So taking like, it's like you said, Dan, and I felt the same way. Like every day in high school and college was like, when can I get to the boathouse? When's practice? What are we going to do at practice today? And and for me, it was always like, when do we get to compete? And you guys have spoken to that as well. Is like, you want to drive your process, and part of driving that process is, if you're in a competitive sport, you have to be the one who wants to compete. It can't be your coach who wants you to compete. It can't be your family who wants you to compete. It can't be your teammates who want you to compete. Like that has to be innately inside of you. You have to want to compete internally. That drive has to exist. Like you have to have that burn. I want to go to the boathouse. I want this. I want to compete. I want to get better. And then I'm also hearing that in this process, it really is about the fit and the cultural fit, and that not everybody's supposed to go to Harvard, and that's okay. It's totally okay. And you know, I don't know if we talked about this in our last conversation, but I had I didn't need it, but I had the confirmation that Cal was absolutely the right choice for me, because I had my Cal experience. And before deciding that it was going to be Cal, you know, my dad went to Harvard. My mom's three brothers went to Harvard. When I was growing up, I'm going to Harvard. I'm going to go to Harvard, 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 Harvard. And that was the whole thing. And I applied early, and they're like, we'll put you in the regular pool. And then the regular pool happened, and they're like, we're going to put you on the waiting list. So now you're on the waiting list, and you can wait it out, and there's a good chance that you're going to get in. And in that time, you know, I was just blinders on and et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, my dad pulled me aside and he's like, you got to think about other options. And in my mind, there was no other options, this and that. But then we started to really talk about it. And, you know, at the end of the day, I started asking the right questions and started really thinking things through. And I was like, wow, you know, Cal could really be the right experience. So I had that experience. Absolutely the best choice of my life. And then shortly after graduating from Cal, I ship up to Boston and I'm rowing a pair with Artur out of the Harvard boathouse. Artur had just graduated. His girlfriend is still at Radcliffe. It's the winning era of Kip McDaniel, the Winklevoss twins, and Malcolm, and they're winning national titles. And I'm in that boathouse and I'm eating in the dining commons and I'm hanging out in the dorms and I'm even like sneaking into lectures and I'm walking around going, there is no way I would have ever cut it here. Like this would have absolutely not. I have no business at this place, none at all. And so I had the luxury of seeing that and realizing, like, yeah, had I really made it, had that been the decision, because I was like, oh, it's Harvard, it's the best, and family legacy and all that stuff, it would have been the wrong decision. And so I truly, truly am a huge fan of the idea of fit, because Steve, as you pointed out earlier, if the kid from California comes to Cornell and they're like, wait, it snows here? Like, what do you mean? It gets like a little bit, or like what's that like? And they've never lived in snow, or they never there are so many variables that exist in terms of finding what that fit is academically, athletically, culturally, and those sorts of things. And so, I always am doing my best when I'm working with youth athletes to talk to them about the idea, like, it's not about the name, it's not about the brand, it's about where you are going to have the best possible experience. And that's how you have to enter the process and investigate, right?
Dude, but this is crazy. Sorry, Justin, dude. Because
no, I mean, go ahead, and then I have a comment on that.
But there's an issue with this again, talking about the recruiting two-way street.
Exactly.
Is what my biggest surprise was. We had zero tools to figure. Like I said, Cal sent me a pamphlet, and it wasn't like I went to the internet and went Cal, right? Like, it's, oh, I don't have the ACT, let me go. But I still had to figure out what schools I went to. And once I figured out about recruiting, and the way I went about it is I just went to, I think it was the head of the school or something. I just went to every college trailer and said, hi, I'm Dan Walsh, and I would like to go to college. Right. And being tall helped. So that was how I got into it. And then it was the follow-up of like having to get the numbers, and like email wasn't a thing. But I remember asking questions to people that were going to colleges ahead of me. Like, what is it like there? Like, trying to figure out where I would fit in, and then doing some official visits. What I find is interesting is today there's more information ever for where all these colleges are. There's stats, there's metrics. And during that process, these athletes know nothing.
Yeah.
Right. And that to me
is
I
constantly talk with youth athletes.
They don't know anything. And it's like, that's actually the part that makes it disheartening, which is like, hey, you have so many more tools than my cohort did, but we knew so much more about everything in our competitors and where we stacked. And so when I would ask a question to an athlete about Northeastern, and like, good, every school has its pros and its cons. And I think that's your job as the coach and the recruiters. It's your job to sell your school. Like, don't be mad if the kid doesn't want to go. That's your problem. Not, that's your job, is to make your program more desirable. Is that when they would list off names, and some of those names you never lost a race to in 20 years, it was like, wow, you just told me you're not competitive. There's these little details in recruiting that become tells to really good recruiters of like, it's because we all know it's a game of poker. Like, are you going to give me what I want? Am I going to get what I need out of this relationship? And I think that people shouldn't look at that in a bad way. Like, you do want it to be somewhat transactional on the benefit of both sides, because if it's going to get fast, it's going to get cold and calculated at some point. So you got to know if the kid and the parents are a great proxy to this, if it's possible. Because if the parents don't have a mature outlook about it, then the kid for sure usually doesn't. Is when it gets cold and calculated, where are we? Is this a young adult, or is this your baby still? Because if it's a baby still, then the kid's going to have problems. The kid's going to have problems. And I think like the fact that they're coming into this process expecting it to be so automated and be autonomous, if I do the page and I have the reel and I have the this and I have the this, right? They're forgetting to be themselves. And the other part is when these kids are told by everyone around them, well, it's just high school. It's like, come on, man. It's not just high school. It is their life. And rowing takes so much commitment to just participate in it. You know, it takes so much the interest. Here's the best thing about youth nationals. And Justin, I promise I'm done. Our cohort of teammates ahead of us, right? So the Olympic generation before us, like the 90, the 88, 92, 96, 2000 era, their kids are all in high school now. And whether it was they were talking to a peer or not, but those parents were all just so happy to be there. So you're talking about the most badass rowers to walk the planet are there. And it's like, yeah, I'm here because my kid's rowing. My kid's rowing, right? I was like, yeah, I don't know. They're just rowing. I'm just happy they're rowing. They love it. It's great. I love it. I get to watch my kid row. We talk about rowing all the time. What are you doing for college? Whatever. Like the questions was always like, whatever. Oh, or they're going to so-and-so. Really? That's awesome. Yeah, that's where they wanted to go. You know, like the best rowers in the world, the most competitive people in the world. Some of them are a couple, right? Both parents are an Olympian. And they're all just so happy that their kids, they have this common bond with their kids. Nothing else matters about where it goes. And to me, that was the juxtaposition, is that you would think our cohort would be like, okay, and then like, kind of King Richard style, of like Will Smith's character from, like, no, they're just like, again, their parents are Olympians, which means genetically, like nature of nurture, the chances of them being competitive are pretty high. With them having some genetic talent pretty high. And that they're just so happy. And that's like the example to remember is like, if the best rowers in the world are just happy to be here, that is the ultimate role of the parent. You're not there to manipulate, calculate, make a strategic plan. Just be happy that your kid's giving you this amazing experience. And then watch what they're capable of.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because, consciously or subconsciously, those parents are likely supporting their child in the way they know they wanted to be best supported or were best supported in their pursuit of what it is that they did. And, it is a really interesting thing because what I remember about the way that I was raised, which I look back on now and I just love it. There were like strict things. You weren't allowed to be lazy. You weren't allowed not to focus on your studies. You weren't allowed not to perform there. You weren't allowed not to do a sport or not be involved with music or not do this, but you had the autonomy to choose what it is that you wanted to do. And whatever it is you chose, my parents, Ed and Noreen, man, they supported us unendingly, and not in the way where they played some role or orchestrated anything in the process. They were there to support and fan the flames and build the excitement and keep us really, excited about what we were doing. And we're just supportive, just there, right? Always there, always supporting, and in many, pivotal different situations. And, one of those I think was when I was an age group swimmer. So I was a swimmer before I switched to rowing, and I didn't switch to rowing until junior year. And I was a good student, but I wasn't an amazing student. And so there was going to I needed something, right, to secure admission to a good college. It just, that I needed a differentiating factor. And I found rowing. I started to fall in love with rowing. I told my parents, I think I want to row. I don't think I want to swim anymore. And my parents sat me down and we had a very serious conversation about that. Well, if you stick with swimming, this is the path that you're on. And here are the likelihood of, what can happen in the next few years based on sort of your trajectory. You can forego that and you can enter a sport that you have no experience in, and we don't know what's going to happen there. What do you want to do? It's like, oh, okay, well, you put it that way. And then you have a lot of thought about it. And I was like, nah, but I love rowing. So I decided, no, I want to row. And they said, okay, then you better get real serious about it. you know, this, you better, you commit to it the way that you committed to swimming. In the back of my mind, I'm like, don't worry about that, you know. But from a parent perspective, it was sort of like, hey, if you're going to forego the swimming thing that you've been doing since you're 10 years old, and you're already performing well in the, you know, CIF sectionals, and you're already making the finals as a sophomore, you know, you sure that's what you want to give up? And, you know, that was it. They trusted that I was making the decision for me for the right reasons, and then supported me in that process. It was not, no, you're not going to row. We need you to swim because that's going to do X, Y, and Z. Or, okay, now you're in rowing and we need to get really heavy handed about it to make sure that it goes right. Right. And so, you know, it's very interesting to me just because I wasn't raised in that environment. When I see, Dan, what you're talking about, where you get the sense that it's like, okay, this kid's good and this kid's good at rowing, but they're not leading this thing. They're not in charge of it. They're very good. And I've seen some really, really good high school athletes where I'm like, man, if you love this thing like at 10%, I would be amazed where you would go from here. But you just feel like they're just, yeah, it's what I do. It's, yeah, I love it. Yeah, it's great. You know, and you're sort of like, you're not, you don't love it. You're not there. And that's where you realize that, you know, other people, other forces are driving the process, and that's tough. And so I feel like it's tough then for you guys as well, because you have to be able to identify that. And maybe it is easy for you guys to identify, but sometimes it takes me a while. I'll be working with an athlete for a few months and I'm like, this is not really adding up. You know, they put on a good show for a while, but then eventually the curtain kind of comes back. So, you know, like I often talk to my athletes about this, that, you know, when it comes to recruiting, you're not going to pull the wool over anyone's eyes. Like a good coach who can recruit well does just that. And they can separate those from, you know, separate those who are truly passionate about it and are going to make a mark over the 4 years that they're going to be there, and those that are just kind of like, yeah, I'm good at this and it's something to do, and I'm talking to you because I'm supposed to. And that kind of talks to what you were speaking about, Dan, where it's, you're, you know, at your time, you know, recruiting with Northeastern, if an athlete comes to you and they know nothing about NU, you're like, what are we talking about? Like, what are we doing here? You know, like,
yeah, it's look, you get it. You come to Boston and you're like, well, there's a billion tools here, so let's go try and get as many in before you go to DC. Like, it's part of it. And I think the nice thing about it, though, and I think this is where recruiting, to talk about it being worth the endeavor, even if you don't get one of those coveted spots, and where sports is beautiful, is, well, you do get some information, data points during the college process earlier than most. And if you have busted your ass for 4 years in high school rowing, and sure, maybe your passion's waning, but you're also like, you don't want to totally have a sunk cost in it, both the parents or the athlete. And it is part of the discovery process. I think that, like, if you go through the recruiting process and you're not like ready, like if you're not chomping at the bit to row in college, it's a good sign you should probably hang it up.
Yeah. So
And
yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Dan.
I was just gonna say, but if you leverage your assets to get that spot, again, to me, it then becomes part of, if a kid takes a spot and quits, I still think that goes on to the college coaches to say, okay, again, data point, what are we doing wrong that we're having the attrition? Right. So I don't think it's just the high school coaches and the high school parents. I think the collegiate coaches, like, if we're going to talk about, again, how are we helping young people not have a mental health crisis because of recruiting? That's what I'm here for, right? Is because a driven kid like any of us, truthfully, they're going to do it. Like, if your kid's got the stuff, they're going to do it. They're going to drive they're going to drive you nuts with the process. Like, I'm sure all of you drove your parents nuts. Right? Like, they were psyched, but they were like, okay. Like, I was like, okay, Dad, we got to go to Boston. I need a ride. Am I taking the train? Where do I get the money for the train? Do I have to work for, like, how do I get there? They want to take me on an official visit. And God bless my dad, man. Dude was like, let's roll. We're driving everywhere. He was so excited to be part, like for him, again, he's like, yes, let's go look at colleges. I don't care where you go. And then I actually turned down a full scholarship to go to Northeastern. And he almost killed me because we were so poor. And they didn't offer me anything in my freshman year. And they took a huge risk. Like my parents took a huge flyer on me for that process. Like talk about driving the process. Like, I'm going, can you help me out? They remortgaged the house to be able to help me out. And they're like, we can only help you a little bit. So luckily it had decent financial aid. And I just had to earn that scholarship and go to Buzz. I was like, I can't afford this any other way. It's rowing is going to pay these bills. And Buzz came through, and between the financial aid and the scholarship, it paid for my tuition. And I just had to take out loans for living in Boston. And it's like, so for me as a recruiter, right, and as a high school coach, when a kid's like, I don't know if I want to do another 2K, I'm like, dude, I had to convince my parents to mortgage their house, bro. Like, what do you want from me? So I think it comes down to perspective too. Like everybody's got to know their audience a little bit. But I think ultimately what it comes down to is I invented this question for myself because it helped me clarify the recruiting process, which is, so are you looking to go to college to row at a higher level? Or are you looking to use rowing to get you into college? And I think that question, just because it was a subconscious thing they had to decide, they usually answered. And if they said, I'm using rowing to get into college, it didn't mean it was a done conversation. Because again, it's on me as the collegiate coach to find talent, develop talent, bring talent in, and believe that I'm such a good coach and I have such a good training program that I will help that athlete find those 20 plus seconds. And if they're really lucky, they'll be a 30 plus seconds. So again, the onus is on me. But I also remember just saying, like, look, you should really roll in college. And even if Northeastern's not the right place to be, and I hope that I see you one day across the line and you do whatever it takes to beat me here at Northeastern. Like I wanted to make sure is that whatever decision they made as a young person in rowing, that they should continue to pursue. And I think that's what's missing is we create this false emotional terminus without giving the young person, wait, this is their life. And regardless, at some point, every athlete has an identity crisis when it's over. And I think that's what your parents did well was about the swimming one, because there had to be a little bit of an identity crisis when you decided to leave this commonplace. Like I know for me, when I tore my shoulder and wrestling was over, the fact that I wasn't going to be a collegiate wrestler, that was my first real like rock hard. Do I have the stuff to keep doing sports? Because this hurts.
Mm-hmm.
This hurts. Like this is over. And I was again, high school, depressed, didn't know what to do, ended on an injury, didn't have the swan song. Like that emotional death of part of me for wrestling was no different than when I rode my last stroke at pursuing the Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
Except I had zero perspective. When the Olympics was over, I was 33 getting married. At 18, it was my life.
Sure.
My life. And that's the other part we have to remember, that these are our young people and this is their life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And if this is the end of the road, that's going to be really hard for them. So there is a gravity to the recruiting process that I don't think we acknowledge.
No, that does make sense.
Everyone's optimistic. They're falsely optimistic.
Sure.
Right. It's going to be great because you're going to get out of college. You're going to get a scholarship. You're going to get a likely letter. You're going to get whatever. It's going to be great. What if it's not?
Right. But to your point, I do believe as well that if you want to row in college, you can.
Yeah.
But that may come in the form of D3 or club, or it may come in the form of a less competitive team than maybe you had featured yourself being on. But at the same time, if you truly want to row at a higher level, at a D1 level, and actually be recruited, well, that goes beyond just wanting to row in college. I mean, that comes with a huge commitment. That comes with huge determination, dedication, desire to make it happen. So I feel like in a lot of ways, that's kind of the gut check, right? The gut check is, are you willing to work as hard as you need to put yourself in a position to be a D1 athlete? Are you willing to work hard enough to learn if you have what it takes to be a D1 athlete, right? Some people don't even want to discover that necessarily. And so, I think that's part of the process as well, because it's just, for me, as I look back being younger, like there's never any, I didn't have to answer that question. That was not a question for me. That was already decided. Like the moment I started taking strokes, I was like, where can I go with this? Like,
Yeah,
how far can I go?
We all had that, right? We all had that. So I think that those athletes aren't the issue.
Mhm.
Right. And I think, but you can't, you maybe sometimes you can get a whole class of those type of athletes. But most of the time you're not. You're going to get these other kids that are in the gray area. Like the Navy SEALs call it the gray men, the gray person, which is they're not exceptional in either way, in any way. And that is a dangerous place to be if you want to be in a high performing team. But that also really just creates a huge delta where they're like, one of rowing's other problems that because it's so hard just to participate, the recreational mindset can creep in real easy. Where you think you're better than you are because you don't see yourself doing any less work. So we lose that metric of speed where speed matters. Right? Like that's the thing is like speed has to matter to you. So it's like, again, if you're getting ready to be recruited and you have this grinding summer ahead of you, if you're not the fastest at your team at your club, you better go to that conversation with the recruiter with your plan on how you're going to become the fastest at your club. Because I'm going to say, are you the fastest at your club? And you're going to say, no. I'm going to say, who is? And they're going to give me the name, and I'm going to look up that name right away. Because it's about the speed at the end of the day. It's the fits matters and who you are matters, but speed matters most. Like my job is to, as a coach, help enable you to win races. My job as a coach is to help enable you to win races, period. And I think doing it, there's a right way to do it where you'll become one hell of a human on the other end of it too. But that makes it even harder.
I could just say from a coxswain's point of view, it's a very different experience.
Oh, I can't imagine, dude. I know what it's like on the recruiting side, but I can't imagine
It's a very different experience.
How Hunger Games that shit must be.
Yeah and no, though. Like, you guys are talking about all kinds of stuff like that. I didn't have any of that pressure. I didn't have any of the like, I gotta go to youth nationals so I can get visibility, and I gotta do this. I gotta pull this kind of erg. I didn't do any of that stuff, right? It was just more like the boats I'm in are going fast. Like I've gotten on the radar of certain people, and it was like you said, Dan. It was snail mail, and like I remember for me, it was like it wound up becoming between Syracuse and Northeastern. I did official visits at both. Um, and it didn't hurt that I, had a former high school, a guy that I rode with in high school wound up, being a teammate at Northeastern. He was a year above me, which was Velco. But like, so that kind of worked out. And then like, I mean, they never heard me. They never heard a recording of me, like nothing. Like I didn't record any of my races. Like this again, this is like 1999. But yeah, there was none of that. Like I wasn't on the junior national team. I remember I had correspondence with Yale. But I knew that I didn't have the grades personally. I knew that I wasn't academically mature enough at that time. I think, in hindsight, like I probably should have figured out a way to be, but I wouldn't trade my Northeastern experience, so don't get me wrong. But
for me, that was the fit. I knew I wanted to go to Northeastern. I knew that I wanted to get on there, that team. I knew that I had a friend on the team that was going to make it an easy transition. Um, and but to your point, Dan, like I drove it. I was in the driver's seat. I knew that I wanted to add high performance to a high performing organization, right? Like I didn't, look at it as like a Hunger Games or I have all this pressure. And I'm fortunate my parents, like you, I was the first man in my family to go to college. And so yeah, I mean, my parents were like, if you get in, we'll figure out how to get you there, right? Like, and so that was all the motivation I needed was like, well, I'm in Florida. Like, if I can get into like this cool like Boston thing, and again, I had these official visits, was I was stoked about it, 17 or 18, however old I was. But I remember going to Syracuse, and for me though, like it was different. Like again, this is as a coxswain, it was very different for me because to me it was the unlock to go to the school I wanted to go to. Like I could have gone to Florida State. I could have ended my rowing career when I finished high school, and that would have been it. And I went to Florida State, and who knows what my life would have been if I did that. But Syracuse in Northeastern recruited me, and Yale was. I was like, hey, like cool literature that you got. Like you remember they used to send like the books of like the crew teams. So like I was like, oh, this is super cool. But like in my head, I'm like, again, I knew that wasn't the right fit. So I was like, we're not going to continue with this conversation. Um, and yeah, those were kind of my two kind of places. And I went to Syracuse, and I was just like, this isn't for me. Like it was Lake Onondaga, and it was like weird, and it wasn't as cool as Boston. And then again, for me though, like again, this is a differentiator though from my experience, was it was that unlock to get me into school. Now, I wasn't like, oh, if I could just get in, then I guess I'll do rowing and that'll just help it. It was more like, no, like I'm gonna get in, I'm gonna row, I'm gonna be successful within the rowing community that I join and add value to that team. That was kind of the mantra I had, even back then. And again, that's it's a mindset that you just have to have. But what again, I said this earlier in the show. Um, when Syracuse sent me after that official visit, the application, which was basically like, hey, admissions office, like this one needs to just go through. I completely was like, I don't want to go there anymore. Because for me, it was like they undervalued me as a academic as well. Like the rowing was the rowing, but as an academic, I didn't want to just get in because I was a rower personally. I wanted to get in because I was a student athlete. And so that's where again, like Northeastern made me jump through the hoops. I had to do the interviews like to get into the college, and like, obviously met with with Buzz, and Joe Wilhelm was the freshman coach recruiting at the time before our freshman coach when I got there. But yeah, I think that was just simply like that the decision was made, and then it was like obviously the best decision. It was awesome for me. But it was just a very different vibe as a coxswain because again, like I didn't have a 615 ERG score or anything like that, and I wasn't like a junior national team coxswain, and I didn't have these recordings, and I think it was just like I had this unwavering desire and a full commitment to I want to be a collegiate coxswain. I want to continue to row. Like everybody said, on in this crew, like I was obsessed with rowing. I was obsessed, like eat, sleep, breathe, like rowing. And I was also like trying to figure out like, oh, like where's it going to be good for me to do my major and like whatever it was. But I was obsessed with rowing. So for me, it was just kind of a very different process. It's I'm really interested to hear like what the process is like for coxswains now. But again, you get the opportunity, you make the most of it, and make sure that like you keep your foot on the gas once you're there. But again, that was just there wasn't parental pressure. That's where I'm like, it's very concerning what you're saying about these kind of youth national situations. There wasn't again. I think my parents are more like the ones that believe me, my parents were not Olympians by any means. But my parents were much more the last days ago, like, he's whatever he wants to do, that's cool. it wasn't a status thing for my parents. It wasn't a like check the box, like we've invested all this time, money, and energy. Like you gotta go to an Ivy, you gotta row in a sprints league school or something like that. It was just simply like, hey, if that's where you want to go, we're gonna support you to get you wherever you want to go. If you get in, we'll figure it out. Right. And that was it. That's all I needed. That was the ticket I needed to be like, all right, I'm just gonna laser on this and that's it. And so I was very sniper like personally in how I went about it. I didn't apply to a bazillion schools. I went on 2 official visits and that was it. And but I knew Northeastern was kind of the North Star and where I wanted to go from like probably the time I was in like 10th grade. Um and then yeah, I just kind of like looked at that and that was kind of the spot. And I had a family member that lived in Boston, so I got to go see the school a couple times even before I went on an official visit. So um again, it takes some planning, but yeah, it's very different for me.
Were we nice to you on your official visit?
Yeah, you were cool to me. You guys were cool to me on my official visit from what I remember.
Do you guys
now
remember? Like, I don't remember. Like, I remember hosting some of
what
them.
I remember about my official visit was like, again, I was a coxswain. I didn't get wined and dined or anything like that. It was mostly like, so there was this guy Velko who rode in high school with me, who I literally used to drive to practice because he was Serbian and he didn't have a driver's license in the US. So he and I were very close friends in high school. He was a year older. He went to Northeastern and kind of opened that door. And then I remember just sleeping on the floor. It was him and Rob Levash,
Leave
I think.
Ash.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they were like roommates. They were freshmen, and so like I just like slept on their floor in the dorm room. Um, I think I might have come to the boathouse. I don't really remember that much about it, but I don't remember anybody being mean. I was just like, yeah, this is cool. Like again, I rode when I started rowing my freshman year of high school and my sophomore year of high school, I believe. Um, my high school team didn't even have a boathouse. Our boats were outside on boat trees. Um, like we rode out of the back of like a marina on a lake. So like for me to go to Northeastern to that boathouse in that environment, it's like literally
It's
it's like going to the Taj Mahal,
but it's
right?
also a nice boathouse.
It's a beautiful boathouse, and I
Henderson's
still
a
think
nice
it's one of the nicest
Henderson's yeah,
boathouses.
Henderson's a nice boathouse. And it was really new
But
then too.
yeah, so again, like as an impressionable 17, 18-year-old, I can't remember how old I was at the time, but like that was like, oh yeah, like this is awesome. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I remember everybody was cool and like again, like I funny story, so you'll appreciate this, Luke. Um, my mom and I were in Boston. Um, this is I think I want to say it's like before I went on an official visit. It might have been like my junior year, not my senior year. So we were in Boston and we were like walking along the Charles, and I think my mom had to go to the bathroom. And so we wind up going into Harvard's Boathouse. Now, I had no idea that it was Harvard's Boathouse at the time. There's not a sign on the door that says Harvard's Boathouse. This is again like 1998. And I'm 99% sure that Charlie Butt like let my mom go to the bathroom in the boathouse. And I asked him, I go, "Oh, is this Tufts Boathouse?" he's like, "No, this is Harvard." So I was like, "Oh, cool." And that was it. um,
That's funny.
but I'm 99% sure it was Charlie Butt. And I mean, that's a classic story. But yeah, dude, so again, very different paths, but no less if you're in that system, you got to be fully bought in. You got to make the most of it, and you got to, as I say, kind of stand on the gas to make sure that like it's nothing's a given, right? And nothing, just because you're on. And then I think you talked about this, Dan, like as far as like, and so did you, Steve. Like you're looking at a 4 or 5 year trajectory of like, is this athlete going to mature out to be super high performing? Are they moldable? Are they coachable? Are they going to be the right fit? Is it culture? I think that on like that's why I was asking about culture earlier, because I think that you can, and Luke, you talked about this on another podcast we did. Um, you weren't the biggest, fastest guy to ever get recruited to Cal, but like you were bought in, it was the right cultural fit for you to then have success. So that's where I think there's an interesting juxtaposition too of like, Dan, I know you're talking about metrics and I agree with you. I think that obviously you know, when you start with a halfway baked piece of clay, it's a little easier. But I do think that sometimes there are folks that, you know, especially on the walk-on side of things, that just, you know, fit the culture and then have like unlimited success because honestly they might be naive and or they don't know what their true potential is. So I think there's an interesting juxtaposition to that.
Yeah, Steve, I mean, Steve alluded to that earlier too, which is so take, I think the recruit that you're telling you about is who you're surrounded by. So like straight up, Fairfield County rowing is a great place for junior rowing, not the best place to find durable collegiate athletes.
And you're saying that because of the mental side of being from Darien or being from Greenwich or kind of North Stanford or whatever it may be.
Well, I think yes, I think it ties into like, or you can say Marin County, or back in our day it was CJRC, like Cincinnati Junior Rowing. I think there's three things that play there. One is youth nationals too big? Winning is a skill set that's as important as anything else, but it's about learning to win to the top level. So like one of the things about like dealing with the depression after the Olympics is everyone goes through it because it is an end of who you are and how you identified yourself. So it just means that it's an athlete's come to the end of their career. So whether that happens at 13 or 33, it's still, there will be a depression, right? That's just going to happen. But I think that as big as that loss was to me, I had decades literally to build the shoulders to handle the mental health journey to come on the other side of it, right? Do our kids have that? Do they have the time to build the shoulders to come out of it? And that's what I think is like, it's too big, is being called a national champion at 13, 14, 15 years old. It does go to your head. You're not really a national champion because there's a level above you. And that to me, I think creates unneeded pressure, to your point, Luke, in that situation where I don't feel that I would call myself a national champion at that age with, again, I have the wisdom I have now, but at this age, I'd be like, I'm a national champion because someone said I was. And then when everyone asked me to go harder, you're like, well, I'm a national champion. I already know what it's like to be the best. Well, no, you don't. And so there's this re-education process of, again, the level setting.
Yeah, Dan, you and I have talked about this. And I think we've oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say really quickly, it reminds me of like swimming days, right? And so I'm like 10 years old, 11 years old, and I qualify for the Junior Olympics. My little mind is blown. I'm going to the Junior Olympics. I'm going to compete in the Junior Olympics. And my first real true heartbreak in sport was to be like, what do you mean this is the San Diego Junior Olympics? They have one in LA? There's an LA Junior Olympics? Yeah, they got LA JOs. What about San Francisco? Yeah, they got San Francisco JOs. So like, it's the Junior Olympics, but it's everywhere. And you're just sort of like, it was like a downer. You know, like I just felt like, man, you know, I thought it was something by name. I thought I'd qualified. And then once I found out, like, oh, you know, this is what it really is, then it kind of discounted the experience because the title that went along with it didn't necessarily represent the level that I was truly competing at. It creates
entitlement, right? That's what creates entitlement, giving false titles.
Yeah.
Do you remember the Dan Beery story about Terrell Owens? Where he was like, Beery was like, yeah, like I was at UTC when T.O. showed up. And T.O. was like, yeah, I'm going to UT. And then he shows up and he's like, what do you mean? This is UT, right? And they're like, yeah, University of Tennessee, Chattanooga. And he's like, what? And here's Terrell Owens, who's like, wait, where am I? I just signed at UT. You know? He's like, what the hell? Um,
Well, yeah, it is that, right? It's the
yeah,
confusion and the misrepresentation. And when, especially when you're really young, 10 or 11 years old, you don't know any better. And then I just remember, the feeling I had when, friends of my parents or, my aunt and uncle were like, oh my gosh, you're going to the Junior Olympics. And I was sharing in that excitement, right? Like I was like, yeah, I'm going. And then when I sort of like realized what it was, then it was almost like, oh, I really didn't like that I got swept away in feeling like, yeah, that's where I'm going, guys. And it was like, no, I'm not doing that at all. Right. I almost feel like I was getting shined on, right? Like, oh, you're going to the Junior Olympics. I'm like, yeah, I am. And it's like it's like the kid that's, in the shopping cart with the steering wheel and they're like, I'm driving, Dad. And you're like, yes, you are, like that's how I felt in that moment. Like I was in the shopping cart, driving the shopping cart. Right. So, I think, Dan, to your point, bringing it all back together, it's kind of like, and this I think is where I'm torn, because it's sort of like if we're talking about development at each level, then that makes sense, right? Like we're trying to develop people that are relatively at the same place physiologically and maturity wise as they're 15, 16, 17, and 19, right? Whether or not that then necessitates a national championship at those age groups, I think is a different conversation.
I think it's perfectly healthy, and it would actually be better to have that regionals is where it stops at those age groups, right? Because if you're good enough at 16, you'll make the varsity. Like, because that to me is what happens, is that it actually limits the kid to say, oh, I made the U16 boat. Why try harder?
Yeah.
Right.
Or you have coaches that are building boats around the age groups of their kids to position as many crews as possible to go and win these titles.
And
right?
Before we even go to the vocational side of it, because that's the other thing that just was really hard to see, is that all that regatta did was increase most coaches' works by like fivefold.
Mm-hmm.
Because they didn't necessarily get more staff, but now instead of having 3 crews at youth nationals, they had 8 crews. And that you're just launching and launching. And I think, just again, looking at this from a holistic standpoint of if there's a general theme for this cohort, it's like, yeah, you can't remove the work. Yeah. Right. In fact, we got to reestablish what work means to be good at something, first of all. And that's where I think the U15s and U16s and U17s diminishes the work to get that title. Right. So it really does cheapen the title, because you don't have to be the best in your club to, you know what I mean? And that is a juxtaposition that I don't personally agree with. But it also comes down to that maturity thing, is that handling the loss and handling that you're not good enough yet being the key word, is such a positive way of getting the dopamine cycle to engage in a positive way. Versus it being the adrenal side of physiology, which is fear-based, right? We need that dopamine side to take over, which is like they want to do the work, right? That's where the healthy obsession comes from, right? Is the wanting to go to practice, the wanting to get it, and when you just are close enough, and knowing that it's not the oh no, it is the Junior Olympics. It's the junior, right? Yeah. Like, no, it's the real deal. Having a realistic stopgap to strive for, that is the rocket fuel to excellence.
Yeah. Well, what bringing it back?
You got to be mature enough. You got to be mature enough, right, to handle loss, to be great. So if the wins come too easy, you're not prepared for that.
What's the Olympic motto?
Right. Faster, higher, stronger.
Faster, higher, stronger. Like, I think it's lost on us that rowing is a stopwatch sport, right? And ultimately, like, yeah, like you could go to the Junior Olympics, you could go to youth development and all the other things we put names on, but it's going to come back to the stopwatch, the clock, right? And so we need to make sure that we're teaching our athletes to be battling the clock and saying, okay, like how can I do it better? Right? How can I live up to my potential? Not be afraid of the clock, but but it's more like, okay, what do I need to do? Do I need to do extra squats? Do I need to spend time in the weight room? Do I need to go for some runs? Do I need to go take a yoga class? Like, do I need to be sitting with a therapist to exercise some demons there, right? Like
Do I need
all
to
of
take a
those
nap?
things.
Do I need to take a
Yeah, do I need
nap?
to take a nap? Do I need, whatever it is, right? We have to, we have to make sure that our athletes are focusing on, it's the battle with the clock, not with each other, not with any of the other stuff. And I think that's that's kind of lost on all of this, right? Like, did you know, like, I remember, like, I was talking to the swim coaches, right? They were saying that sometimes if because it's a winter sport, sometimes in the Northeast, they used to have fax meets, they would call it. You ever hear of a fax meet?
Mm-mm.
It's where, if there was a snowstorm, right, and you couldn't travel, you would just swim in your pool and then you would fax the times over to the other coach. And then they
Yep.
would say, okay, here's who won. Right. So they would
That's wild.
fax meets.
Yeah.
Right. And we could literally do that with rowing. And then there'd be like oh well, this was like the debate over COVID, right? When people were trying to organize the virtual races, and it was like, oh yeah, well you rode it in a tailwind, I rode it in a headwind, or you rode it with current, right? So we have all those arguments, but still, like, it's a stopwatch sport. That's it, right? Like you're battling the clock. At the end of the day, like when we lined up, when we'd race like different countries, you're still it's how fast can you go, not did you beat the other country. It's how fast did you go fast enough that your bow ball finished in front of the other crew, not did you beat someone. It wasn't full Conan, right, Dan? If I don't know if you want to get the sword out, it wasn't full Conan where it's
if you're
like
gonna
you
name
have to
drop,
crush
if you're
your
gonna name,
enemies.
if you're gonna name drop, if you're gonna name drop,
You have to crush your
Of course,
enemies,
it's
see
sitting right
them
next to him.
driven before you.
if you're gonna name drop,
Yeah.
Of course, it's just right there.
It's like just happens to be right there.
Just this old thing. Yeah.
I just keep this in my boot all day. What are you talking
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I could put it on the
Use it
back
to
strap
scratch
and
my
it's just
back.
here. It's just behind me at all times.
Yeah, he's just got to be careful because it's sharp, right?
It is sharp.
Well, and you should definitely be careful with that.
Good.
The fact that it was right next to him is phenomenal.
It is phenomenal.
But
So
yeah,
going back to it, then it sounds like it sounds interesting because oftentimes the right answer is not A or B. It can become more nuanced, right? So Dan, it's interesting to say that from a local and regional level, creating some of the age group categories can be great for development, but when it comes to actual, highest level competition in youth rowing across the United States, perhaps that is about creating the very best boats, regardless of age group, right? And so I have seen situations in which, you may have an athlete who qualifies for U17. They could row in the varsity. They could do the U19. They could be in that 8. But you got to build that better U17 boat because you're trying to win that event too. So even though the athlete could be in that U19 boat and has worked hard enough and earned the right to be in that boat, because of the age category restrictions, it becomes more advantageous for the club to say, hey, we need you in the U17. So I know you want to race in the varsity and you have every right to be there, but we're going to need you in the U17s for the betterment of the club. That starts to become questionable.
This was the debate about getting rid of freshman rowing,
mm-hmm.
which is, I personally wish there wasn't a freshman rule, because I was good enough as a freshman, which I think many are, that could have actually helped the JV or the varsity boat perform better at sprints. But no matter how good I was, our freshman class wasn't deep enough at Northeastern to be competitive.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think that, like, when you're a Cal or a Washington or a Harvard, or you have a tradition of freshman rowing year after year, or you have the numbers for freshman rowing, or you have the recruiting spots, of course you don't want to get rid of freshman rowing, because those athletes are learning how to win, which is important. But like, you also learn how not to lose when you're on a losing team.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like Northeastern, I did a lot. Like, it's funny is that the way I finished off and kind of the way you started your varsity career, Justin, it's just a funny juxtaposition of those two things. But like, we were not fast and then became fast with the right, with the right influx of really competitive youth, younger guys, Justin, Jarvis, right? And the seniors that were just like tired of losing all 4 years and feeling like jokes, and just like, this is our last year to make it, and like, Steve, you kind of, like you said, like, you came in to restart a legacy, kind of similar to Luke. And I think that's another key thing that is important is, are you a contributor to the team you're on? Because I think that does happen at some point. It may take a couple years, but you have to show that you're contributing to the current team you're on in some format in that high school process. And I think that like, to me, because there's two challenges that, there's a lot of challenges as a junior rower when you go to college of why the attrition rate might be so bad.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, one, you could have peaked early. Two, you could have been overtrained to squeeze as much out of you, because that is the job of the club to win, and the coach to win, and your teammates to win. And it is high competitive. So like, and that's not your fault as an athlete, but like, yeah, you were overtrained too young to get a result. So there's an overuse, injury, burnout, something, emotional deficit, who knows? But then the third one is walk-ons, that do still exist, or people like even you, Luke, that come to rowing later in life and they're just more talented. But I remember realizing this somewhere around, I don't know, I think it was like 2003, maybe 2004, when like you just saw who was making the national team out of college. And you're like, dude, so this, like, being a junior rower is not an advantage here in this system at the best of the best. And I think emotionally, though, those guys show up to college, they size up, the guys and the girls all do the same. I know we all athletes size each other up. And like, that person's about the same size, same build, same whatever as me. I'm going to see what they do, and I'm just going to try and beat their number, right? The competitive gene kicks in. So somebody's pulling a 145 on a 10-minute piece, so you pull a 144.5. But the person who is a junior, what we don't give them the credit for is they've reached an emotional terminus way more times in rowing than the walk-on, where it's all brand new. And I think that optimism of being brand new, where you realize like, oh my God, I've rowed for 4 years, or some of these programs 6 years, and this person who's never rowed is beating me. What was the point? Like, there's that's a painful place to be, that you you have to say like, I am not good enough. And if you are thought to believe that you are great, let alone good enough, too early in that process, you don't have the emotional maturity of loss to get through that and say, yeah, but I'm here to win, so fuck them. I'm going to go 144.0. I don't care that they're like, I should be a junior rower. I should have an advantage. I got to find it. And I think that's missing a little bit too. Like, cause like, we don't acknowledge to that. So our coach is going to that junior rower and saying, hey, look, yeah, they have less experience and that's an advantage. But who are you? Are you going to, like, where are your advantages? What can you draw from this experience? How do you get ahead of them? Or is it just like, oh, God, here's another recruit that's just burnt out? So like, again, looking at it through the lens of the child, what do they need in that moment? And I would say they don't need someone to be like, just assume that they're done, because that reinforces that environment that maybe they are done, versus acknowledging like, yeah, this person, but I believe if you do this and you stick through it, maybe you need a break because you have trained for it. Like, we have to treat them, we have to professionalize the sport. And it does start at the top. If our Olympians feel like they were not supported enough as humans, which there is a little bit of that collateral damage there. Like, you are superhuman at the Olympic level. So therefore there are superhuman expectations. But collegiate rowing is just a step down from that. And high school at a competitive level is just a step down from that. It, emotionally. So I think that, to me, it's, if we could do a better job of how do we help not only transition to college and make it know that there are options other than this one decision, to like help that athlete make the best decision. But then once they're there, why don't we figure out how to stop that attrition? Because I agree. What's the fastest way to make a boat better? Find a better athlete. That's true. Like, that's the easy fix. But why don't we try and make better athletes? And the recruiting game, I think, has changed that thing too. It's about who can I get that's better and put in versus who can I develop to be better. And that's another thing that I think happens, is that when you have a national championship, to have this feel good moment based off the rules, you take away that development pipeline of again, mature. I want to use the word maturing the athlete appropriately.
Yeah. Well, there's always another podium to look for, right? There's always another, I just sent you guys a nice little meme, right? Like rowing and in athletics, right? Like, it's a Sisyphean task. You're always rolling the boulder up the hill. And so yeah, we can crown a U15 national champion, but we also need to make sure that we're saying, hey, there's more. Great. Good job. Get going. Like, you did it. Keep going. Right. Like, and if you win a national championship, it's like, hey, can you make the national team? If you win, a U19 world championship, it's like, great, what are you going to do in college? If you win an Olympic medal, it's, did you win gold? Right? How many times have you been asked that, Dan? What, did you win gold? Right? Like, there's always, and then if you win gold, it's like, how many did you get?
Yeah.
Right? Like there's always another podium.
Yes, there always is. And I think, but you can only accept that if you've been allowed to have the path to build the shoulders wide enough to handle the pressure.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I honestly, I think, like, when we talk about longevity, it's about, like, what are you doing it for, right? Like Luke, we haven't really even, we've kind of danced around it, right? But it's what are you doing it for? Are you doing it for the intrinsic or extrinsic, like the buzzword, right? Intrinsic or extrinsic motivation? Are you doing it for the shiny object that's like dangling around your neck? Or are you doing it because you actually love it?
Yeah.
And you have to love the grind and that pursuit, because and you have to feel like you've never done enough. And
Steve,
and if you think that just because something goes around your neck, you've arrived, then, like, you're wrong. Like, this is, again, it's a stopwatch sport. How fast have you gone?
I was just gonna say, it goes back to, all right, here's a fun one, because I think we're coming close to, we might have to wrap this up.
Yeah.
I might have to, because I have to go unload the car for groceries. This is the real this is the real world for us still. And Justin, by the way, dude, 10 days in the second kid and you are on the mic. Like, talk about high performance mindset. Talk about showing up, talking about, like, digging in. Like, you are a boss, brother. You are a
Thank you.
boss. Thank you. I
No
I
worries.
know I remember what it was like to be in this state of mind, and you are here with us, dude. And I am so like you are one of the best teammates I've ever had. Thank you.
Much love.
I look. I think this is very common in our conversations, Luke. You opened up a fantastic Pandora's box because I think there's a lot of hope, right? I think to me, like we have 4 minds here that see that we want to help these young people achieve their dreams, and I would love to just quickly talk to the group, like name one tool. Like what's one tool that we think as this collective group, Olympians, Division I athletes, recruiters, sports marketing, exercise physiology, like what's a tool that I think start with you, Justin, is like what could a 15 to 19-year-old, what do you think they should use? Like what bestow some knowledge on them. Help them get through it.
Just as far as mental capacity goes.
Anything, man. Like what can help them enjoy this recruiting process?
Well, I think Luke alluded to it, right? I think it's just managing expectations.
I think it's understanding that like there's pressures that are going to be put upon them. I think it's I think the biggest tool that I could say that they probably should look at is just knowing themselves, knowing what they want to do. It's hard to do at 15. But that's okay. There's time. I would say that like your life doesn't end when your college career begins, right? If it's not perfect. So I would say if it was a mantra, I would say like don't let perfection get in the way of great. Right? That's okay. Like you don't have to be perfect, but you can still be really great. So I think that's the tool to kind of look at is you can be really good and that's okay. It's just not being too hard on themselves. And then honestly, like just enjoy the process. Like I think the less pressure you put on yourselves, the more success. We've talked about this in this episode. And the less pressure you put on, the more successful you're going to be. Actually,
Yeah.
yeah, that'd be mine.
Luke, I mean, this is for you. Like, who do you want to hear from next?
Yeah.
Or whoever wants to jump, or I can, maybe I can add to it. The first thing that comes to my mind is understanding that there are things that we want to do or things that we want to be that we are not yet, and those things are out on the horizon. And you have to have goals, because if you're in rowing and you don't have any goals, you're just working out. That's all you're doing. You're just working out. You're not training for something. You're not working towards anything. You're just working out. And that's great for from a health perspective, but not necessarily from an achievement perspective in terms of where you want to go or who you want to be. And at the same time, we can't wake up every morning with where we want to be right here. You can't wake up every morning and be like, I'm not there yet, right? The very dangerous concept is it's not good enough until it's good enough. It's very dangerous. And so what I really encourage with all the athletes that I work in with is just get lost in process. Favor process over outcome. The outcome that you want will come from the daily attention to the process. And it's really about what did you do today to move you one step closer to your eventual goal? What did you do today to shrink that delta? What did you do the next day? What did you do the day after that? How did you continually shrink the delta between where you are and who you are right now, and where you want to be and who you want to be in the future? And if we wake up every morning just consumed by, I'm not that person yet, I'm not that speed yet, I don't have that erg score yet, I don't have that talent yet, that's not going to be the driving and motivating force, nor the best way to get where you want to be. Instead, and you guys have talked about this, it's that intrinsic motivation where there is a passion and a burn on inside, where you are you're a student of the craft. How can I get better today? How can I become faster? How can I be more skilled? What are the things I can do today to improve? And to get lost in those daily wins, because you come out the other side of practice better than when you started. and to be able to stack those wins, those little micro wins on top of one another over and over and over again. And that is what I've seen in myself and in my athletes, the fastest way to move forward towards any goal, but especially the really big and lofty ones. You can get eaten up by those. If you let them eat you, they will eat you. And instead, it's really about, taking a piece of it at a time on a daily basis. So I'm a huge fan. One, Dan, you've talked about it, ownership of process. You have to be in charge. You have to own it. It has to be yours. And then really getting lost in that process, just being so consumed by it on a daily basis that you are just trying to do the best, and it's a certain mentality that I never thought about it this way when I was rowing, but I thought about it after I was done rowing. Every day was race day for me. Like the mental preparation on the ride to the boathouse was like, we're going to do steady state today. And it's going to be the best steady state I've ever done in my life. I'm going to take the best steady state strokes I've ever taken in my life. And I would just get zoned in before getting into the boat to go do mundane steady state, just boring, long, steady state. But I would be in that state of mind where it's like, this is today's race. This is the performance aspect, is doing steady state, bang on the right intensity, the right split, and just being very consistent in that. And that would be the race day for that day. Right. And so for me, it was always, preparing for whatever it was. And if it was technique, these are the best strokes I'm ever going to take. If it was steady state, this is going to be really, really consistent work to the 10th of a second between every single, 4x20 that we do. And if it's intensity, then yeah, it's racing high intensity. But it was really about the process of that day, what we were trying to achieve. And just, that was it. If I do this to the very best of my ability, I will eventually and more quickly get to where I want to be. So yeah, for me, it's favoring process over outcome to achieve the outcome that you're looking for.
I'm going to push you a little bit, Luke.
Yeah, sure.
And it's actually like, I remember listening to this lecture that Bo Hansen, who's an Australian Olympian, gave. And he talked about the term VUCA, right? VUCA is a military term, stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. And my takeaway from that talk, which I don't know if he said explicit, I don't remember if he said explicitly or not, but my takeaway from that talk was you have to be goal oriented and not wedded to process. And I think sometimes people can get like so caught up in this is the plan. I'm going to do this. I'm going to like checking the boxes along the way to their goal, that they forget that like, we used to say, right. Like, I had a saying in high school, right. It's very like religious oriented, but the saying is like, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans, right? Like, I think it's a country song too. But then there's also on the flip side, right? Like we say, some of us would say on the national team, like the minute you know the plan, that means it's already changed. Like just like, it's like the Schrodinger's cat of like, well, I wanted to do this, but now we got to do this, right? So I think what I see is sometimes people get really caught up in the like checking the boxes and like this is the process, and they get so process oriented that they forget that like the end state is what you're trying to achieve. And sometimes you get so stuck in process that you forget to adapt to when the plan needs to change.
Mm-hmm.
You got hurt, family member got sick, you got to take a family vacation, like all of these like little things that are going to necessitate you changing the plan, but sometimes you can't, like you're so stuck on the plan you made that you can't change the plan, and you can't like jump tracks to the next track, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would say yes, like you have to be process oriented, but then you also have to be able to zoom out and say, but wait a second, like the end goal, is rowing in college, or the end goal is I want to be the fastest I can be, or the end goal is I want to be here and I would love to row when I'm there, right? Like
Yeah.
whatever that end goal, that end state is, you have to be able to adapt the plan as you go,
Yeah.
versus being stuck on the
Yeah. And
in that.
I will 100% concede to everything you just said, right? But I will also tell you, I'm not an expert in the adaptability portion of things, right? And so I know that of myself in my training, right? So what happens with me is literally the definition of insanity. It's like once I have the idea of like this is going to work, then I'll do it and it doesn't work and I'll get up the next day and I'll do it again until it works. Like I was always of that mentality. Like the world will bend to my whim,
Dude,
right? And it wouldn't
you,
work.
you
It
told
wouldn't
us a
work.
story last week about driving across the country twice to change the plan.
Well, yeah, I adapt. I adapt when I have to. But my
Yeah.
point is, it doesn't like I'm a creature of habit and routine. So when I'm thrown off, that's very difficult for me. But to
But
your
that's your
point,
same superpower. Your same
In Luke's
superpower
defense, that
can
was
be,
in pursuit of a goal that he
yeah.
did the course cross.
But also
but
your same superpower can become also your own kryptonite, right? And so
Mhm.
I think like both of you are right.
Oh no, I'm in complete agreement.
Yeah.
Complete agreement. And there's nobody who goes 365 days a year without injury, illness, some sort of derailment in training, something happens, you get pulled off center, right? It's Mike Tyson. Like everybody has a plan, and they get till they get punched in the mouth. And
Or
and so
else are on a
yeah,
plane.
there you go. Yeah, if they're saying something to him on a plane. Um, but the point there is, yeah, no, I didn't in my long-winded explanation of favoring process over outcome, I didn't account for what Steve is 100% correct about. Like, yes, I mean there are going to be times that things are going to be derailed. So the only thing that I can really say in response is then it becomes about how quickly can you get back to center. So many things are going to pull you off center in your pursuit. How do you get back to that center, which is that line that you're trying to process? But yeah, and my like I Steve, to your point, yeah, I left Princeton, I went across the country, and then very quickly went back to Boston. And in the retelling of that story, it's all rainbows and butterflies, right? It's like, oh yeah, this happened and that happened. The reality was, it's like me in the car, like literally gripping the steering wheel to a point that it's probably going to shatter in my fingers with a whole bunch of expletives being yelled to no one because I'm by myself, trying to process this, complete tatters of my life, leaving the Princeton Training Center and trying to figure out what's next. And so, it's that whole Steve Jobs thing. I think it was his quote, and I hate it, but I love it, which is like, you can't connect the dots going forward. You can only connect them, going backwards. Right. So when you look back, you're like, oh, well, this went to this and went to that. But when you experience it in real time, it's a different scenario. So no, yes, I would be remiss if I'd left out what you said, because it can't be as simple as I tried to make it, where it's like, yeah, just every day is going to be great and nothing's going to happen other than greatness because you have your process and you can stick to your process. So no, I'm completely with you on that. It's just not a strong suit for me.
Yeah. No.
The Andrew Carnegie quote is, some people like to prefer not to put all their eggs in one basket. I like to put all my eggs in one basket and watch that basket very closely.
Yeah.
I like
I mean
that.
that's yeah. I think and I think that's a great, to me that's a good tie-in is, and this goes to the group, and this is what I learned myself, right? And I still have to work on this, but it's know your limits so you know which ones to push, but don't push them all at the same time. I think an example, like in wrestling, there's these two type of drills. It's either called bull or king. And so bull is whether you win or lose, you stay in until there's a certain amount of rounds or a certain amount of time. And then king is you stay in as long as you're winning.
Woof.
And both are equally as brutal. And so I just remember one time, one of the cool things about wrestling is like generally alumni come back. And so like it's a very cool way of staying in touch with the sport. And it's very helpful because generally someone's bigger, stronger, or nostalgic. I remember my senior year when I was really good at the beginning of the season, I probably should have wrestled 215, but I wanted to wrestle. I wanted to lose the weight because it was part of the wrestler's mentality, right? To like how much weight. It's just fighting, right? In combat sports, you suck weight, and it was foolish because at the beginning of the season when I was fresh, I was able to run through king of all the alumni, all the coaches, my whole team, all the whole time. Right? I just had this my height, I just had this really natural ability to like endure the practice, and rowing gave that to me, right? Like rowing gave me that superpower. But then as I was also losing the weight versus focusing on growing and getting stronger into that weight class, and like so I pushed too many limits at once, that same drill hurt me at the end of the season. Right. And so like I think it's one of those things that I would like to help is know your limits so you know which ones to push through and which ones really matter to help you get to the next limit. Because to me, in that, if I were to go back and just say, hey, don't suck the weight. If you think you can win it all at any weight, right? Like find the right challenges. So like, yeah, one of my favorite things to do when an athlete's trying to negotiate better boat, better equipment, better seat, JV versus like, hey, if you're really that good, then the JV will become the varsity. If you're really that good, win with the bad equipment. If you're really that good, like take your headphones off. If you're really that good, try doing it. Try doing it without your lucky socks. Like I think those are the limits that you want to try and push is like, what can you start to remove that's like, what is a challenge you can lean into that is also not holding you back anymore? You know, I think, and that's a really hard place to discover. And the earlier that you can discover that, the more I think that you will A, enjoy the process, B, you'll get closer to the outcome, and C, you'll have fun with it because it becomes this puzzle of yourself. And having all those different deltas to strive for will help you break through a plateau. So, yeah, every single one of us are going to have a 2K that we just can't get off our backs. Nobody I know was like, I PR'd on every 2K and I'm the best. Like, nope. Nope. And it comes at the worst time, that plateau. It comes at the worst time. But if you fixate on that process, to your point, Steve, right? Or if you ignore the outcome or you're not having fun, if you don't look at the other deltas as like, okay, what can I improve on? And it goes back to, I think, finally, like maturity is like when you find that ability to say, okay, well, I'm doing less than 10 pull-ups, so let me get 10 pull-ups. So I can't squat my body weight, so let me squat my body weight. I keep saying I can't run a mile. Let me see if I can learn to run a mile. I can't skull, so let me start sculling. And all of a sudden, if you find some of these other deltas, it distracts you. The same process is a distraction to a new limit, and you push new limits, and you go back to this old limit, and then you break through. So like know your limits so you know which ones to push through. Just make sure you're not picking too many challenges that just become like it just becomes suffering pornography for no other reason. Well, I was in the worst boat and I was sucking weight and I was making it so hard on myself. And I suffered from that. It's like, well, aren't you an idiot? You know? And yeah, I think that like one of the best things about this has been is like, man, there's so many different ways to do it. Try and find your way. Try and find your way and make your way complement someone else's way. Find that person that's beating you and be like, cool, show me how you did that. I think like my final story is one of the best ways I've ever seen that is Kobe Bryant was an interview, right? And like I remember meeting Kobe Bryant and it was so cool, right? Like because he treated me like an equal at the Olympics. To him there was no celebrity, and whether it was just media training or who he was, but he seemed so genuine, like those basketball guys who were. And it just he brings up the story of like there's this famous video of him as a young rookie, and Jordan just breaks his ankles, and they run back to the other side of the court, and it looks like Kobe's in his ear, and everyone assumed that Kobe was talking trash, and he's like, no, I wasn't talking trash. I was asking Michael, how did he make that move? And Michael's response was like, you move your foot here, you do this, you do that. And then like Jordan was teaching Kobe how to beat him. That is it. That's it in a nutshell, right? Is if you are so good, you think you're that good, teach someone how to beat you. And if they beat you, ask them how they did it. That's it. That's the secret. And sometimes you got to ask that to yourself. Like when you're not PR on that 2K, it's like, okay, this part of me, how are you beating me? Oh, you're sucking on that negativity. Like, you got to be able to sit with that discomfort in yourself. And yeah, like everything you guys are saying is so beautiful, man. It all is good. But ultimately you got to find your way. And part of the way you do that is like find out who's beating you. Thank them. And then ask them how. That's how I think you do it. If it worked for Kobe and Michael, man.
Then it should work for the rest of us.
If it worked for those dudes. If it worked for those dudes. And I mean, I definitely found that in each of you. Like Justin, obviously it's different. But it was, you brought so much energy to a boat, man. I was like, how do I match this guy's energy? Luke, you brought so much technical prowess to a boat. I was like, how do I row better than Luke? Steve, you brought so much steadiness, dude. You were unflappable. I was like, all right, how do I get more stoic like Steve? So this to me, man, is like, if we really, like, you guys made me better. Because I did everything I could to beat you all at your own game. That's it. And you patted me on my back when I did it, and then you really couldn't wait to do it back to me. And I,
True.
couldn't wait. You guys could not wait to be like, I'm going to get him next time.
True.
Yeah. And it was fun. It still is fun.
It still is fun. But that's the point now in these conversations. There's so much to learn, right? Because there's so many different in the same experiences, right? Which is, the pursuit of rowing at the highest levels collegiately and national team and Olympic wise. There's all sorts of different takeaways and different individual experiences within that pursuit, right? Not everybody, even within a boat of 8 guys, you ask each guy their story for that specific boat at a specific time. And this story is going to be different for each guy going down the shell, how they got there, what their battles were, what the triumphs were, what they think the strength of the boat is, or the things that the boat needs to work on. You'll find a variety of different answers for the same entity, this boat, this elaborate engine of, eight pistons and the jockey, right? So it's these conversations I'm really enjoying them, because I know that we're going to take this panel, we're going to expand it out, and we're going to talk to people. And I have all sorts of guesses of what some of the guests are going to say their experiences are. But like, Dan, you and I have known each other since you're 17, 18 years old. And every time we have these conversations, I'm like, I didn't know Dan thought about it that way. Or, I didn't know that experience about Dan. Or like, I didn't, I'm learning so many new things, which is fascinating and so valuable to me to understand your experience, and Steve to understand your experience, and Justin to understand your experience, right? Because it's through these conversations that we start to, even now, I'm learning more about the sport, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do I take what I'm learning here from Justin and Dan and Steve, and how do I apply that working with youth athletes now? How do I serve them better? Oh, I hadn't thought about nationals that way, or I hadn't thought about the dynamic this way, or I hadn't thought about certain battles that youth athletes might be dealing with. I just hadn't looked at it that way. But the way that Steve and Justin and Dan are talking about it, that makes me think. It makes me think, am I delivering the very best for these athletes, or can I evolve? Is there something that I'm missing? And so it's that practice of, always trying to evolve in whatever it is that you're doing. No matter how good you are at a thing, you can always be better. And like, I'm just having so much fun with this format, because like, I can read so many books on rowing, and I can watch so many YouTube videos, and I can, do this and that. But there's this free form thing where, like, in my head, I'm like bookmarking all these moments in this conversation where I'm like, yep, 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 and it's like,
I got to leave with this question.
It's so
my
powerful.
My bladder is getting me
It's
again.
always your bladder, dude.
Dude, well, it's good. It's been 3 hours. It's been 3 hours.
He's gonna go check his email.
It's been 3
Yeah,
hours.
seriously.
So here's I think the proposed question for the next Rower Academy chat is, so we hear the narrative from the coaching of our peers, right? Oh, these kids are just getting softer, and they seem to want to double down on the totalitarianism and the authoritarian approach, right? And it's kind of like, well, what if you switched your approach to not like still have them like, yeah, this is going to be really, really hard. But what if you don't, for lack of a better word, like, yeah, try a softer approach, but not on the standard. Just how you explain the standard. And I think if the kids are already too soft, can you make them softer? Right? And I don't think you can. So you have this awesome platform for kids to say, like, so what? Admit that you're the softest generation in rowing.
Yeah.
Prove us wrong.
And that is
Prove
interesting.
us-
And
prove us
it'll be
wrong.
very expansive for another conversation. But is it necessarily that this generation, like that's become sort of this narrative that's out there, like, oh, the kids these days, like,
we didn't have school shooter drills. We didn't have social media.
Exactly.
We didn't have a high divorce rate. We didn't have we didn't have the same level of existential crisis. Like, yeah, we had nuclear war, but we didn't have the same climate. Like, give these kids a break. It's different for them. Harder, easier, whatever. It's different for them.
Is how are you going to meet the athlete where they are?
Yes.
Right.
But they're further away from us than they've ever been.
Potentially. How are you going to meet the athlete where they are? And with that understanding, apply it to the concept that, like, yeah, rowing's hard. Competition is competitive. Like, there are hard edges to this. There are wins and losses. Most people lose, right? And so how do we, if there is a gap between those things, where the athletes are today and the reality of competition, what is our role in helping bridge that gap and bringing them towards that? Because again, through this conversation, we're like, dude, rowing was the hardest thing ever. It sucked. And I loved every minute of it, right? Like, that's the mentality that we carry to this day. And it's sort of like, I talk to my athletes all the time. Rowing is hard and rowing is fun. And those are not two mutually exclusive things. They're the same. They're the same.
Two things can be true at once.
There you go, right?
Scott Fitzgerald. Two paradigms can exist at the same time.
That, for me, that's really the message I want to get out to any youth that are struggling with this, or, having trouble with it. It's like, yeah, dude, the joy and the excitement is in the struggle. Yeah. It's in the overcoming. It's in the adversity. Like, that's where the good stuff is. That's where you're really going to find out who you are and what you're actually made of.
And who you want to row with.
Yeah.
Well, so I would say, like, again, Jack Halen, my high school coach, writes me a letter right before the Olympic final. that, he writes me an email, and I open it the morning of the Olympic final, and it says, "Good luck, Steve. Just remember, the secret to winning the race is be the first boat to cross the finish line."
Yes. Yes.
Really, really simple, but really hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there is one crew that gets to win the race.
Right.
There's one crew. So yes, there's a lot of losing, but you get to define winning and losing, right? Like we were, in '07, we raced the semifinal in the 8, and we finished the semifinal, and we were I think we were second in the semifinal. And so we finish and we're all dejected. We didn't win our semi. And we're like, fuck, like it's gonna be like we might not medal. And then next to us, you have the Polish.
You're ruining my
crew.
legacy. You're ruining my legacy. We won the semi. Because
We won the semi?
I stroked the men's 8, God
right,
damn it.
whatever.
And I'm not letting you take that away from me. Because
Okay.
guess what? Stroking the men's 8 is the coolest thing in the world, even to a 4th place. So that
Why
was
do
a
you gotta
win.
ruin my story?
To your point,
Why
but we
do
won
we
that
I have
semi.
no idea what's going
'Cause
on
you
right now. And I
ruined-
love
we
every
won
minute
that
of it.
race.
Let me
We
tell
won
the
that
story.
race.
I don't
We
really
won
care
that-
what the
we won the
result
semi.
is.
I didn't watch
I'm
it.
trying to
I don't
remember
have any idea
why we
what
were
happened.
dejected. It was
Because you
more
can't
than a
remember the
decade
races
ago.
we won. You don't even remember winning the head of the Charles one year. I can't trust your memory. You don't remember winning the head of the Charles. You're like, oh, we won that one. Yes, Steve.
Well, I assumed we won. I just didn't remember it happening. But
Whatever.
anyways,
I won that
right?
semi.
You look over, and the Polish crew that we beat is like hooting and hollering and smacking the water, and we're like,
This part's true.
why the hell are these guys? What are they doing? We just beat them. They're gonna get 6th tomorrow in the final, and it wasn't until afterwards that we realized, oh, they were cheering because they just qualified their boat for the Olympics,
And they all got to go.
which meant that they were gonna go
Yeah, they became Olympians.
to
in that moment.
they became the Olympians right there, right? So it's up to you to define what winning is in a way that like recognizes, like ultimately the time is the time, right? But only one crew gets to stand atop the podium ever, right? Like, and to your point about like, crews like junior crews, like, strategizing and, oh, we're going to put the U-17 here and this, right? People look at times and they're like, it doesn't matter if you're in the under 17 or the under 19. People are going to look at times and go like, whoa, that crew went fast.
Would you rather have a world record or a gold medal?
From when? At the Olympics?
Doesn't matter.
Period.
Would you rather
Period.
have be the fastest a boat's ever gone, or a gold medal? Because even the fastest, right? Because even the fastest a boat's ever gone didn't win them a gold medal on that race. It was a heat.
Yeah.
So what?
I've had a world championship medal. I've never had an Olympic medal. I'm actually going to go with the world record.
To me, the process, right? Like being so close to Olympic gold, having an Olympic medal, right? Winning races throughout whether it was a heat or a semi or time trial, national championships, knowing that we still have some of those like Lake Carnegie, which is a real great empirical data treasure trove, like how many Olympic gold medalists have trained there and like set records, is to have some of those records, I think, still stand from '08. Like I'd have to figure it out. I'm sure I can ask Mike, but I'm pretty sure we went 154 for 750.
Yeah.
That's fast.
You remember that day?
Dude, it like once you go that fast, everything else is spoiled. So yeah, I would rather the world record and like the piece of paper that says like officially certified you went that way, not
Yeah.
that just some old guy
Like,
fat fingered
yeah,
the
when you have,
stopwatch, right?
I
Like,
mean, the ultimate is to have both, right? The ultimate is to have both. But to your point, Steve, and this is why I love you in so many ways, is that getting bronze was hard, right? It was a hard loss to be that close to gold. And, you got to find ways to cope with that loss. And it definitely hurt me really hard. I've been depressed on and off because of not winning the Olympics in my life, which is just such a shame for me because I can't help it. That's not true. I can help prevent it with the right work, like working out, meditating, mental health, this. Um, but ultimately, like, I'm not supposed to be here statistically. What, like, 3 out of 4 young men in my family's generation were addicted to drugs and alcohol. 2 of them died, like, so I'm just, holy crap, like, talk about a win. I get to feel bad about not winning the Olympics. What a win. But in that same race that we lost, we were also the fastest boat in the world for 3/4 of that race. Like, it didn't work out well, but and Canada has the gold, but for 3/4 of it, we were faster than them. They just got ahead of us in that first one enough. And it's just like, that's a win, man. That's a win. That's a win to go faster than anybody else in the world in something is just like, what? You know? Like, so, yeah, leaning into the grandioseness is part of it. Like, you just bending, to your point, Luke, like, yeah, bending the world to your will. Like, yeah, that's a pretty good standard, but I think I could beat it. Relish that. Relish that insanity. Relish it. Just don't let it own you, right? Just don't get to the point where you break all the limits and then you're broken. But it's a hard place to be when you like breaking limits. It's a hard place to be. So I'm glad I have friends like you that dance in that space.